Ever wonder why you sometimes misremember things, or get caught in a logical loop you can't escape? What if I told you your brain is constantly playing tricks on you, subtly distorting what you perceive as reality? Settle in, because for the next 3 hours, we're diving deep into the fascinating world of cognitive biases, the hidden architects of your perception. The certainty mirage. You sit there, certain about your beliefs, your memories, your opinions, your choices. There's a quiet, comforting hum beneath your convictions, a feeling of firmness, of ground beneath your feet. You know what happened. You know how you feel. You know who you are. And because you know, you don't question. You don't pause. You move forward, led not by doubt, but by something that feels far more reliable. But what if that feeling of certainty, the warm, reassuring glow that says, "This is true," is not the result of truth at all? What if it's a glitch, a trick of the mind, a survival instinct that prioritizes closure over accuracy? This is the certainty mirage. And once you see it, it changes everything. The human brain hates ambiguity. It sees open loops, unanswered questions, unresolved conflicts, unexplained feelings as threats. Not just intellectual discomforts, but primal dangers. In evolutionary terms, hesitation could mean death. If you paused too long to decide whether that rustling in the grass was a predator, you didn't survive long enough to pass on your genes. So over time, the brain evolved to close those loops fast, to favor speed over precision, confidence over contemplation. It learned to mistake the feeling of knowing for the fact of knowing. You've experienced this 1,000 times. You misplace your keys and instantly suspect your roommate. There's no evidence, just a flash of irritation, a story your brain fills in, and suddenly, you're certain. You scroll past a headline. Don't read the article, but you know what happened. You feel it. You comment, argue, defend your position, not because you've deeply researched, but because your brain needs closure. And closure feels like truth. This illusion runs deeper than you think. Consider the confidence-accuracy disconnect. Study after study shows that people's confidence in their answers doesn't reliably predict whether they're correct. In fact, sometimes the more certain someone is, the less likely they are to be right. Why? Because confidence isn't built on evidence. It's built on coherence. If a thought fits neatly into your worldview, if it completes the puzzle, if it gives you a narrative that feels whole, your brain rewards it with the warm sensation of certainty. It doesn't ask, "Is this true?" It asks, "Does this make sense to me?" And when the answer is yes, it stops searching. This is how false memories form. Not because people are lying or delusional, but because the brain prioritizes narrative closure over historical accuracy. Two people can witness the same event and walk away with stories that contradict each other, each equally certain, each equally convinced. Not because one is malicious, but because certainty is not a marker of truth. It's a marker of emotional resolution. Think about that. The next time you say, "I know what I saw," what you really might be saying is, "My brain has stopped being uncomfortable about it." The certainty mirage is most dangerous not because it's rare, but because it's everywhere. It's in the way we form political opinions, remember childhood events, argue with loved ones, even judge ourselves. You've probably told yourself stories that feel like facts. "I always mess things up. I'm not lovable. I know they don't care about me." But these aren't objective truths. They're closures, emotional endpoints, ways the mind ties up the frayed edges of uncertainty with certainty, even if that certainty is painful. Because for the brain, any answer is better than no answer. And this isn't just psychological. It's neurological. MRI scans reveal that the brain processes uncertainty using different neural pathways than certainty. Uncertainty activates the anterior cingulate cortex and the insular cortex, areas associated with pain and distress. Certainty, on the other hand, engages reward circuits. It literally feels good to be sure, even when you're wrong. So what do we do with this knowledge? If certainty is an illusion, does that mean we live in permanent doubt? Not exactly. It means we learn to hold our beliefs like a loosely clenched fist, not so tight they can't be challenged, not so loose they slip away. It means we start noticing the difference between what we feel and what we know, between conviction and evidence, between stories and reality. Let's take an example that hits closer to home. Imagine a friend hasn't responded to your messages in days. Your mind rushes in to explain. "They're ignoring me. They must be angry. They don't value me. Each thought sharpens the sting. And soon, you feel certain. You don't need to ask. You know. But then, days later, they call. They've been in the hospital. Their phone broke. Your certainty evaporates, replaced by guilt, confusion, and a stunned realization. You were wrong. But you didn't feel wrong when you were in it. That's the power of the mirage. The problem isn't being wrong. The problem is being convinced you're right, in the absence of inquiry, humility, or curiosity. The problem is mistaking the end of questioning for the arrival of truth. And here's the real twist. We're wired to see doubt as weakness. We praise strong opinions, firm beliefs, unwavering convictions. We equate certainty with leadership, confidence, even morality. But the truth is, the wisest people are often the most uncertain. Not because they know less, but because they know how much they don't know. They've seen the mind's tricks, the memory distortions, the emotional fog. They've learned to say, I could be wrong, not as a disclaimer, but as a discipline, not as weakness, but as strength. Because the moment you admit the possibility of error, you open the door to clarity. So the next time you feel sure, pause. Not to doubt everything, but to remember this. Certainty is not a destination. It's a signal, a flag planted by the brain that says, I'm done thinking. But the truth doesn't live where thinking ends. It lives in the space where you keep searching, where you ask, what else could be true? What haven't I considered? What am I afraid to question? Because real clarity isn't the absence of doubt. It's the courage to hold doubt alongside belief. And that's where truth begins, not in the glow of confidence, but in the quiet, humbling, beautiful embrace of not knowing. The confirmation echo. You walk through the world thinking you're collecting truth. That each article you read, each post you like, each video you watch is sharpening your understanding of reality. But what if it's not truth you're gathering, only echoes? Not a mirror of the world, but a carefully tuned frequency that repeats back to you what you already believe. This is the confirmation echo, a silent force that doesn't shout, doesn't argue, just gently affirms. It's that warm feeling when you read something and think, exactly, that's what I've always said. That subtle rush of validation when someone, somewhere, shares your opinion, and suddenly, it feels more real, more true. But that feeling, that comfort, that internal nod, it's not evidence. It's bias. And it's rewriting your reality, word by word, like a whisper that sounds too much like your own voice. We like to think of ourselves as rational, open-minded, truth-seeking beings. But the truth is this. Your mind doesn't crave accuracy. It craves consistency. It wants to be right, not challenged. It wants harmony, not contradiction. So, without even realizing it, you start filtering the world. You notice what agrees with you. You scroll past what doesn't. You click what feels familiar. You skip what feels strange. And each choice, each tiny decision, reshapes the reality you live in. Think of your brain like a courtroom, not of justice, but of loyalty. Every time a belief is questioned, your brain doesn't act like a judge weighing both sides. It acts like a lawyer defending its case. It cherry-picks evidence, silences witnesses, and frames arguments not to find truth, but to win. Even when you think you're being fair, even when you try to be objective, the confirmation echo is already at work because it doesn't come from malice. It comes from how the brain is built. You believe the news you agree with. You trust the people who sound like you. You find the YouTube channels, the podcasts, the subreddits, the threads that match your rhythm. And then, day by day, you build a cage out of agreement. A soft, pleasant, invisible cage. And the scariest part? You think it's freedom. You say, I did my research. But you don't research, you reinforce. You don't investigate, you confirm. And when someone presents a fact that doesn't fit your worldview, it doesn't feel like information. It feels like an attack. You recoil. You argue. Or worse, you ignore. Because now, the truth isn't a mirror. It's a playlist. And you're the DJ. Imagine a flat earth believer. Or a climate change denier. Or a conspiracy theorist lost in the labyrinth of QAnon. We laugh at them. We call them delusional. But ask yourself, how different are you really? Because you do it too. Just in subtler ways. More socially acceptable ones. You think your views are nuanced. Rational. Grounded in evidence. But so do they. They've curated sources. Found communities. Read research. Watched hours of content. They feel just as certain as you do. Certainty is not proof of truth. It's often proof of repetition. Look at algorithms. They don't show you what's true. They show you what you'll like. Because engagement is the currency, not enlightenment. The more you interact, the more they refine. The more you agree, the more they feed. Until one day, your entire digital world is a hall of mirrors, and every reflection nods back. Politics is no longer debate. It's tribal religion. Science becomes weaponized opinion. History becomes cherry-picked memory. And slowly, without realizing it, we stop speaking to each other. We stop listening. We build realities side by side, like neighbors who no longer share a language. Confirmation bias doesn't just warp your news feed. It warps your relationships, your decisions, your self-image. You remember compliments more than criticism. You replay praise and mute disapproval. You tell yourself stories where you're the victim, the hero, the misunderstood genius, because those roles feel safe. They feel right. They confirm your internal script. You ignore the signs that say otherwise, the apologies you should have made, the harm you may have caused, because facing those contradictions feels like erosion, like the floor cracking beneath the story of who you are. Even in memory, the echo plays tricks. You remember the good moments more vividly with people you love. You minimize the bad. You create a filtered highlight reel of your life, not because you're lying, but because your mind edits for coherence. And the echo is always editing. But here's the terrifying part. It doesn't feel like distortion. It feels like clarity. The more filtered your world becomes, the more comfortable it feels. You're not drowning in chaos. You're bathing in agreement. And that agreement becomes addictive. It becomes identity. So when someone threatens it, they're not just wrong, they're dangerous. You see it every day. Online mobs forming not because someone lied, but because someone dared to be complex, to question the orthodoxy, to say, maybe it's not so simple. And in a world shaped by echoes, nuance sounds like betrayal. Doubt sounds like disrespect. And the only way to belong is to chant back what you're supposed to believe, louder and louder, until you forget there was ever another note. But what if you paused? What if, instead of looking for what confirms, you search for what confronts? What if you welcome the sting of being wrong, not as failure, but as freedom? What if truth isn't a place of comfort, but of collapse? The kind of collapse that rebuilds you, grows you, humiliates you, then humbles you. That kind of truth doesn't echo. It interrupts. Ask yourself, when was the last time you truly changed your mind? Not because it was trendy, not because your circle shifted, but because you faced a truth that didn't feel good, but was good. Can you even remember? Because in a world that rewards confidence over accuracy, we've forgotten how to doubt well. We think changing our minds means weakness, but it means strength. It means you're awake, alive, capable of growth. You want to escape the confirmation echo? Start here. Follow someone you disagree with. Read a book you think you'll hate. Listen without preparing your rebuttal. Say, I might be wrong. Not as a trick, not as a debate tactic, as a genuine surrender. And watch what happens. At first, you'll feel lost, unmoored, like the ground is shifting. But stay there. Stay in the discomfort. That's where the truth lives, not in the echo, but in the silence after it fades. Because the world isn't a mirror. It's a storm. It's chaos. It's contradiction. And to find clarity, you don't need more agreement. You need more courage. The courage to ask, what if the things I believe most deeply are the very things I need to question the most? That's not weakness. That's revolution. The anchoring trap. You walk into a room and see a painting labeled $10,000. It's abstract, a blur of color. Maybe it speaks to you, maybe it doesn't. But something strange happens. That number, $10,000, lodges itself in your brain like a silent parasite. Minutes later, someone offers to sell it to you for $5,000, and suddenly, it feels like a deal. Not because you value the painting, but because you've been anchored. This is the anchoring trap, a psychological sleight of hand so subtle, so automatic, that even the most rational minds fall victim. Anchoring is the reason first impressions matter more than we care to admit. It's why the first number you hear in a negotiation, no matter how arbitrary, pulls your judgment toward it like a black hole. It's why your estimate of someone's intelligence, someone's trustworthiness, even your memory of an event, can all be warped by a single, initial suggestion. But why does this happen? Because your brain hates uncertainty. It craves footing. So when it's handed an anchor, a starting point, it grabs on and uses it to build all subsequent reasoning. You think you're evaluating facts, but really, you're orbiting a first impression. You are reasoning in the gravitational field of suggestion. Picture this. You're in a courtroom. The prosecutor suggests a 30-year sentence. That number lands with force. Even if it's absurd, even if the facts later show the defendant deserves 5 years, the jury's perception has already tilted. Studies have shown that even arbitrary numbers, like a judge spinning a random wheel before sentencing, can significantly sway the punishment they hand down. The will had no logic, but the brain doesn't care. The anchor has been set, and it's not just in courtrooms. Think of real estate. An overpriced home at $1.5 million sits on the market. No offers. Then, the price drops to $1.2 million. Buyers swarm. Why? Because that original price was the anchor. $1.2 million now feels like a bargain, even if the home is still overpriced. Now imagine how this plays out in everyday life. You meet someone, and they seem rude, just a bit cold, distant. That's your anchor. Weeks later, they're warm, kind, thoughtful, but your mind resists the update. It doesn't discard the anchor. It simply adjusts, ever so slightly, still dragging every interpretation through that initial judgment. Anchoring doesn't just affect how we see others. It shapes how we see ourselves. A child told early on that they're bad at math will carry that anchor for years. Even if they improve, even if they begin to excel, that original label colors their self-perception. I'm just not a numbers person, they'll say. Not because it's true, but because the anchor made it feel true. The effect is especially sinister because it operates invisibly. It feels like logic. It feels like we're thinking freely. But anchoring wraps itself around thought like a vine, guiding its path while pretending not to exist. Let's say you walk into a store and see a jacket marked down from 10,000 Indian rupees to 4,000 Indian rupees. Your brain whispers, you're saving 6,000 Indian rupees. It feels like a steal. But pause. Would you still think it's a good deal if you'd never seen the original price? Maybe not. But now, that fake 10,000 Indian rupees has infected your valuation system. It's no longer about what the jacket is worth, only about how far it is from the anchor. And this is where anchoring becomes dangerous, because it means our judgment isn't based on truth. It's based on sequence, the order in which information arrives. In one study, 2 groups were asked to guess Gandhi's age at death. One group was first asked, was he older or younger than 144? The other, was he older or younger than 35? Both numbers were absurd, but the results weren't. The first group guessed higher, the second lower. Their answers clung to the first number, even when they knew it was nonsense. This is how easily our internal compass is corrupted. And think about what this means in today's world. In media, in politics, in online arguments. The first headline you see, the first tweet that goes viral, the first claim that gets made, it becomes the anchor. And even when corrections come, even when the truth surfaces later, it rarely shifts perception back to zero. Because we don't weigh information equally. We weigh it chronologically. It's why propaganda works. Why rumors stick. Why apologies feel hollow even when sincere. The first cut is the deepest, not because it hurts more, but because it defines the scar. So how do we resist it? The truth is, we rarely escape the anchoring trap. But awareness helps. Next time you're given a number, pause. Ask, why this number? Where did it come from? Does it reflect reality, or is it shaping my perception of it? When someone makes a first impression, pause. Ask, am I judging their truth, or just their timing? Am I clinging to the first version of them I met, or seeing the whole story? And most importantly, when you hear a bold claim, a strong opinion, a viral idea, pause. Don't let the first voice you hear become your compass. Because if you don't choose your anchor, someone else will choose it for you. And once it's set, it drags everything down, even the truth. And the worst part? You'll think it was your idea all along. That's the trap. That's how belief becomes a puppet. How confidence becomes performance. How reason becomes echo. And it begins not with ignorance, but with certainty. With a number, a first glance, a gut reaction. The anchor drops silently, and your mind starts sinking. The familiarity comfort loop. You walk into a room you've never seen before. The colors are different. The furniture is strange. The smells, the echoes, the light, they're all foreign. You don't realize it at first, but your body tenses slightly. Your breath shortens. Your eyes scan quicker. Because even if there's no danger, your brain detects something far more subtle: unfamiliarity. And unfamiliarity, to your ancient instincts, is risk. Now, think of the opposite. A song you've heard 10 times before. A face you see every day. A routine that repeats itself in the same order at the same time. These are the things that feel like home. Even if they aren't safe, even if they aren't good for you, they feel right. Predictable. Soothing. And this is the trap, the familiarity comfort loop. Your mind isn't wired to chase truth. It's wired to chase patterns. It equates frequency with value, repetition with trust. And the more something repeats, the more it slips past your defenses. The more it feels like it belongs. Not because it's been proven, but because it's been seen. This is why you hum songs you hated the first time. It's why people stay in toxic relationships. They're familiar. It's why conspiracy theories gain traction. The more they're repeated, the more they seem plausible. Not because they've earned belief, but because they've hijacked the brain's shortcut. If I've seen it often, it must be safe. Imagine watching an advertisement. The first time, it feels like noise. The second time, it's background. The fifth time, your brain registers it. The 10th time, it's stuck in your head. And eventually, without even realizing, you're quoting it, recommending it, buying it. The content didn't change, but your perception of it did. Familiarity wore down your skepticism. Psychologists call this the mere exposure effect. The phenomenon where people tend to develop a preference for things simply because they are familiar with them. Even if those things are neutral, even if they're wrong, your brain has a built-in bias toward the known. Not the correct, not the useful, just the known. And the implications run deep. Think about beliefs you hold today, not the ones you've reasoned out, but the ones you absorbed from the world around you. Ideas repeated in your family, on your newsfeed, in your culture, your religion, your school, your language. They weren't chosen, they were embedded. Repetition turned them into facts, into identities, into truths you'd fight for, even if you couldn't explain them. This is the mechanism behind cultural conditioning. Why people can grow up believing diametrically opposite things and still feel certain they're right. Because familiarity breeds conviction, not truth. You weren't given a neutral space to explore ideas. You were handed a script, and every time you repeated it, it sank deeper, until it became yours. Even memories aren't safe. Studies show that false memories can be implanted simply through repeated suggestion. You hear a story often enough, you begin to believe you lived it. You see a face repeatedly paired with positive feedback, and you start to like that person, even if you've never met. Your brain doesn't ask, is this real? It asks, is this familiar? This loop shapes your relationships too. You're more likely to trust people who remind you of past connections. You feel more comfortable around accents that sound like home. You're drawn to partners who echo childhood patterns, even if those patterns were unhealthy. Because your nervous system doesn't prioritize what's good for you. It prioritizes what feels recognizable, what can be predicted, what fits the loop. It's the same reason people miss their abuser. Why victims return to toxic dynamics. The chaos, the intensity, it's known. And so it feels safe. Not because it is, but because the brain would rather dance with the devil it knows than step into the abyss of the unknown. And this loop is easy to exploit. Marketers use it. Politicians weaponize it. Algorithms feed it. You see the same ideas again and again in your feed, not because they're true, but because they keep you engaged. They tap into your loop. The familiar narrative. The familiar outrage. The same faces, phrases, sound bites. Repetition becomes resonance. And resonance becomes belief. We don't live in a world of ideas. We live in a world of loops. Watch your own thoughts. When you hear a new opinion, how do you react? Not logically, but emotionally. You flinch. You resist. Not because it's wrong, but because it's foreign. And when something feels foreign, your brain whispers, danger. But that's the illusion. Truth is often uncomfortable. Growth is often alien. The best ideas are usually the ones you resist at first. Not because they're wrong, but because they challenge the loop. They break the rhythm. They demand effort. And effort is hard when your mind is wired to conserve energy and stick with what it already knows. The familiarity comfort loop doesn't just shape what you believe. It shapes who you are. The clothes you wear. The food you eat. The friends you choose. Even the thoughts you think. Every part of your life echoes past patterns, and the more you repeat them, the more they harden into identity. So how do you escape? You don't destroy the loop. You interrupt it. You pause before accepting a thought just because it's familiar. You ask yourself, is this true or just known? You expose yourself to perspectives that make you uncomfortable. You sit with unfamiliar music. You read books from people you disagree with. You travel. You wander. You question your instincts, not to abandon them, but to test them. Because growth lives outside the loop. Familiarity can bring comfort, but comfort is not always your friend. Comfort can numb. It can seduce. It can trap you in a perfectly padded cell where nothing ever changes and nothing ever hurts, but nothing ever evolves. So next time something feels off, don't look away. Look deeper. It might not be wrong. It might just be new. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what you need. The spotlight misfocus. You walk into a room and your heart ticks louder. Maybe your shirt feels too bright. Maybe your hair isn't sitting right. You imagine every pair of eyes scanning you, measuring you, thinking something, anything, about you. A stain on your jeans, a crack in your voice, a word you mispronounce, a step you take too fast or too slow. You feel like you're under a spotlight, center stage, naked to judgment. But here's the truth. They're not watching you. Not like you think. This is the spotlight misfocus, the illusion that the world sees you with the same intensity that you see yourself. It's not vanity. It's not arrogance. It's biology. It's bias. It's the deeply wired, cognitive distortion that convinces your mind you're being observed far more than you actually are. Because to your own mind, you are the main character. Your thoughts are the loudest. Your fears are the sharpest. Your mistakes echo longer than anyone else's. But in reality, everyone else is too busy starring in their own personal drama to notice yours. Imagine this. You trip on a stair, drop your phone, and look up red-faced, expecting half the room to be stifling laughter. You feel like you've just made a public scene, but almost no one noticed. And even if they did, they forgot a moment later. Their attention span is short. Their empathy often unconscious. Your embarrassment, though? It lingers. It loops. It burns. Why? Because you don't remember the trip itself. You remember the feeling of being seen, the heat on your neck, the surge of shame. And so your brain magnifies that single event, casts it in high definition, plays it back on repeat. But in their minds, it was a blink, a blip, background noise. This phenomenon isn't just personal, it's been tested. Psychologists Thomas Gilovich and Kenneth Savitsky coined the term spotlight effect after a famous experiment. They had students wear embarrassing t-shirts, like one with Barry Manilow's face, and asked them to estimate how many people noticed. The wearers guessed about 50%. The actual number? Barely 25%. We overestimate how much people notice us, especially when we feel exposed. But this effect goes deeper than just embarrassment. It invades our confidence. It makes us second-guess compliments. It makes us afraid to raise our hand in class, to speak up in meetings, to wear what we want, say what we mean, or chase what we love. Because somewhere, in the shadows of our mind, a whisper says, everyone will see. Everyone will judge. But they won't. Not really. They're not watching you. They're watching themselves. Think about the last time someone else tripped, or stumbled, or said something awkward. How long did you think about it? A minute? Less. Did you even remember it by the end of the day? Now compare that to how long you've replayed your own missteps. Hours, days, years even. That's the imbalance. That's the misfocus. It's not just about shame either. The spotlight misfocus applies even in success. You give a great presentation and you think everyone must be impressed. You post a photo and feel watched. You crack a joke and wait for the room to laugh or stay silent. But their attention is scattered, diluted, often filtered through their own insecurities. They're wondering how they look, whether they said the right thing, whether they are being judged. This distortion doesn't make you foolish, it makes you human. Because the mind is self-referential. Evolution wired us to scan for danger, to be hyper-aware of how we're perceived by the tribe. In ancient times, exile meant death. So being liked wasn't a luxury, it was survival. And even now, with no tigers in the bushes, your brain still acts like one awkward moment could cost you everything. But you're not in the jungle anymore. So here's the strange truth. No one is thinking about you as much as you think they are. That's not an insult. It's liberation. Let that sink in. All those fears, all that performance, all the energy you spend polishing yourself, editing your words, rehearsing your lines, fixing your appearance. It's not being seen the way you believe. And that can feel depressing until you realize the power of it. Because if they're not watching your every move, then you're free to move. If their gaze isn't fixed on your flaws, then you can stop hiding. You can breathe. You can try. You can fail. And fail again. You can dance even if you're bad at it. You can wear the bold color. You can speak even if your voice shakes. You can show up not as a performance, but as yourself. And it's not just you. The person next to you, they feel the same way. The stranger across the room, they think they're under the spotlight. The friend who seems confident, they go home and replay every word they said. Everyone thinks they're being seen. Everyone thinks they're being judged. But most of us are just trying to survive our own echo chambers of self-consciousness. The mirror of the spotlight effect doesn't just magnify your flaws. It distorts your self-worth. It makes you smaller than you are, more fragile, more afraid. But here's the catch. The more you believe you're being watched, the more rigid you become. And the more rigid you become, the more distant you grow from the person you could be. Break that. Do the awkward thing. Be seen, even if no one is really watching. Because the moment you stop assuming that everyone's attention is glued to your every move, you begin to reclaim yourself. Your mind becomes lighter. Your courage grows. And you stop living for the imaginary audience you've constructed. Because the truth is, you're not a show. You're a soul. And you were never meant to perform your existence. You were meant to live it. And maybe, just maybe, that's where real freedom begins. The just world filter. You see a stranger trip on the sidewalk and instinctively think, they must not have been paying attention. You hear someone lost their job, and part of you wonders, maybe they weren't doing well anyway. A friend shares a story of heartbreak, and a small voice inside whispers, they probably should have seen it coming. You don't say these things out loud. You may not even realize you think them. But they're there. Quiet. Reflexive. Subtle. This is the just world filter, the psychological lens that convinces you that life is fair, even when it's not. That good things happen to good people. That bad things happen for a reason. That the universe is balanced, because it should be. But what if that's not truth? What if it's comfort masquerading as logic? The just world bias is your brain's attempt to shield you from the chaos of reality. Because if you admit that life is random, that innocent people suffer, that cruelty often goes unpunished, that kindness doesn't guarantee reward, then you're left in a world without guarantees. And the human mind is allergic to that kind of uncertainty. So it creates a shortcut. It edits the world to feel more predictable. It whispers, they must have done something to deserve it. It whispers, he earned that success. It whispers, she brought it on herself. Not because it's true, but because it's safer to believe it's true. Think about the stories we tell. In fairy tales, the wicked are punished. The virtuous are rewarded. In movies, justice arrives just in time. In folklore, karma has perfect aim. These stories aren't lies, they're wishes. Reflections of how we want the world to be, not how it is. But real life doesn't follow the script. Children die in war zones. Criminals retire rich and free. The kindest people get sick. And sometimes, the cruelest ones live the longest. The just world filter doesn't account for this. It can't. So instead of adjusting to reality, your mind starts bending reality to match your belief. You see a victim and ask, what were they wearing? You see a failure and think, they weren't trying hard enough. You see someone struggling and assume, they made bad choices. But do you see what's happening here? It's not just about them. It's about you. Because if they caused their suffering, then you can avoid it. If they made a mistake, then you can make better choices. If they deserved it, then you are safe, so long as you are good. That's what the just world filter really protects. Your illusion of control. It turns randomness into reason. It turns suffering into consequence. It turns tragedy into morality. But at what cost? Empathy begins to erode. Victims are blamed. Systemic problems are ignored. Privilege is defended as merit. Misfortune is dismissed as deserved. And suddenly, you're not seeing people anymore. You're seeing verdicts. You're seeing karma where there is none. You're seeing a courtroom that doesn't exist. This isn't just philosophical. It has consequences. Studies show jurors are more likely to blame victims if they believe in a just world. Medical professionals may unconsciously assume patients are responsible for their conditions. People are less likely to donate to those they think deserve their poverty. And it's all happening beneath awareness. Not because people are cruel, but because they are scared. Because the just world filter is fear wearing a mask of fairness. And the more afraid we are, the tighter we cling to it. But here's the truth. Justice is not automatic. Karma is not a machine. The universe does not keep score. Bad things happen to good people. Good things happen to bad people. And most of the time, it's not about desert. It's about circumstance, luck, chance, privilege, systemic structures that were built long before we were born. So what do you do with that? You let go of the illusion. You stop asking, did they deserve it? And start asking, how can I help? You stop assuming pain is earned and start honoring it as real, no matter where it came from. You stop protecting yourself with detachment and start practicing compassion without condition. Because that's the only way we build a just world, not by pretending it already exists, but by admitting it doesn't and choosing to act anyway. You don't have to abandon hope, but let it be the kind of hope that builds something, not the kind that excuses you from seeing. Because when you take off the filter, when you stop needing the world to be fair, you finally become free enough to make it more fair. For someone else. For everyone else. For the first time, maybe, even for yourself. The self-serving distortion, you ace the exam, and you say, I studied hard. I deserved it. You get the promotion, and you think, of course, they saw my talent. But when things fall apart, when you miss the train, lose the job, ruin the relationship, suddenly, it's the timing, the system, the stress, the other person's fault. You rewrite the narrative so the villain is always out there, and the hero, unshaken, is always you. This is the self-serving distortion, a quiet, persistent bias that bends your memories, judgments, and identity into a shape that flatters you. It doesn't scream. It doesn't boast. It simply edits. Subtly, persistently, relentlessly. Your mind becomes a master storyteller, and the story it tells is always tilted in your favor. Not because you're lying, but because your ego is writing the script. And the ego? It doesn't care about truth. It cares about protection, preservation, pride. When you succeed, your ego highlights effort, skill, perseverance. It zooms in on the part you controlled. But when you fail, it cuts the scene differently, crops out your mistakes, adds a filter. It's the traffic, the weather, the noise, the lack of support, the betrayal, the misunderstanding. Every frame is selected to minimize damage to your identity. And this isn't rare. It's universal. Psychologists call it the self-serving bias, a cognitive illusion that makes you believe your wins come from within and your losses come from without. It's the reason a gambler credits skill when winning, but blames luck when losing. It's why CEOs take credit in booms and point fingers in busts. Why athletes gloat in victory and curse the referee in defeat. But here's the unsettling part. It doesn't feel like distortion. It feels like justice. You should get credit for your hard work. You should explain away the setbacks that weren't your fault, right? The problem is, this bias doesn't just warp your past. It shapes your future. Because if every failure is someone else's fault, you never grow. If every success is self-made, you never appreciate the hidden forces that helped you rise. Mentors, luck, timing, privilege, context. They all vanish in the spotlight your ego casts on itself. You tell yourself, I earned this. But maybe you inherited it. Maybe you stumbled into it. Maybe someone else opened the door. Maybe your victory started years ago with a parent who sacrificed, a teacher who believed, a friend who vouched for you. But those parts don't make the final cut. They're left on the editing floor because they dilute the glory. This bias is not just personal. It's systemic. Nations do it. Companies do it. Cultures do it. They elevate their triumphs as proof of virtue and explain away failures as external sabotage. We are great because of who we are. They are weak because of what they lack. History becomes propaganda. Truth becomes myth. And entire generations grow up believing they are chosen, exceptional, not because it's accurate, but because it's flattering. And the danger is this. Once you believe the story, you defend it. You cling to it. You become its hostage. You ignore the cracks in your performance, the warnings in your behavior, the hurt you may have caused, because they don't fit the narrative of the hero. You say, they overreacted. Not, maybe I was cruel. You say, it just wasn't meant to be. Not, maybe I didn't try hard enough. You say, They just couldn't handle my honesty. Not. Maybe I was brutal, not brave. And over time, the ego's story becomes not just persuasive, but absolute. Untouchable. And that is where growth dies. In the soil of self-flattery, nothing difficult can take root. Because growth doesn't come from feeling right. It comes from being challenged. But what if you tried a different story? What if you looked at success and said, yes, I worked hard, but I was also lucky? What if you faced failure and said, yes, the odds were tough, but maybe I made mistakes too? What if you stopped curating your life like a highlight reel and started living it like an honest documentary? Messy, flawed, human. What if the next time you were praised, you said, thank you, and I had help? And the next time you were criticized, you said, maybe I need to listen. Because here's the truth. You are not the sum of your victories. You are the sum of how you respond to the truth, especially when it hurts. Especially when it humbles. It's not weakness to admit fault. It's not shameful to acknowledge luck. It's not failure to confess that you sometimes fall short. That's not surrender. That's evolution. The self-serving distortion is seductive. It tells you you're always right, always deserving, always justified. But if you only listen to that voice, you'll never know who you could become, only who you pretend to be. So the next time you feel the need to defend your perfection, ask yourself, am I telling the truth or just protecting the story? Because in the end, the story isn't what makes you strong. The truth does. The hindsight bias loop. You watch a building collapse in the news and say, of course it fell. Look at those cracks in the foundation. You hear about a friend's breakup and whisper to yourself, I knew they wouldn't last. A company fails, a scandal erupts, a tragedy unfolds, and suddenly, it all feels predictable. The warning signs were there, weren't they? The clues, the red flags, the little moments you now interpret as obvious. This is the hindsight bias loop. The mental trap where we convince ourselves we always knew what was going to happen, when in reality, we didn't. We just can't stand the idea that we didn't. The human mind is allergic to uncertainty. So when chaos turns into outcome, when noise becomes signal, we retell the story with the ending baked in. We reframe randomness as inevitability. It doesn't feel like a lie. It feels like clarity. But it's not clarity. It's memory in disguise. Imagine a coin toss. Heads or tails. Pure chance. Now imagine someone tells you after the fact that it landed heads. You say, I had a feeling it would. But that feeling? It's a reconstruction. You didn't know. You only believe you knew because your mind rewrote the past to fit the present. And it happens everywhere. In relationships, in war, in finance, in health. You hear that someone died young. They were always reckless, you say. But did you say that before they died? Or are you editing the past to fit the present? You learn that a company's stocks crashed. I should have seen it coming, you mutter. But if you really saw it coming, why didn't you act? Because hindsight bias doesn't just fool you. It paralyzes you. It turns lessons into illusions. It tricks you into believing that knowledge was always available, that you were blind when everyone else was looking. And so, you punish yourself for not seeing the inevitable. You shame yourself for not predicting what was never predictable. But here's the haunting truth. Even if you had all the facts, the future would still surprise you. Because life doesn't follow a script. It improvises. It turns left when you expected right. It doubles back. It explodes without warning. And every time it does, your mind rushes to make the chaos look logical. A terrorist attack happens. Analysts say the intelligence was there. But that intelligence was buried in 1,000 other signals. No one knew which one would be the explosion. A pandemic spreads. Experts say the signs were obvious. But before it began, every sign could have pointed to a dozen other outcomes. The problem isn't ignorance. It's illusion. The illusion that reality was clear all along. Think of a detective story. You get to the end, and the twist is revealed. Suddenly, every detail, the missing scarf, the broken clock, the strange glance, feels like an obvious clue. But rewind the movie. Watch it again without knowing the ending. Now those same clues blur into noise. They're no longer inevitable. They're just possible. That's what hindsight bias erases. Possibility. It makes you forget how uncertain things once felt. It sterilizes the chaos. And here's where it gets darker. Because this illusion doesn't just affect your past. It reshapes your identity. You think, I always had a gut feeling. So you trust that gut more. You stop questioning it. You grow more confident. Not because you're wiser, but because you're rewriting the past to flatter your instincts. You think, I should have seen it coming. So you label yourself careless. You become more anxious, more rigid, more afraid. Not because you failed, but because you're punishing a version of yourself who didn't have today's knowledge yesterday. And this is the loop. Hindsight bias creates a false memory of certainty. That memory rewrites your beliefs. Those beliefs shape your future decisions. And when those decisions lead to new outcomes, the loop begins again. We imagine ourselves as time travelers, returning to past moments with perfect vision. But we're not. We're historians with erasers. Editors of a story we keep redrafting to make ourselves seem smarter or guiltier. We say, I knew it all along. But the truth is, you only know it now. And knowing something now doesn't mean you knew it then. So what do we do with this trap? How do we escape a loop that masquerades as wisdom? First, humility. Accept that the future will always surprise you. Even when it seems predictable. Even when the signs are clear. Because you're not seeing the signs. You're seeing them after the answer was revealed. Second, compassion. Toward yourself. Toward others. That decision you regret? You made it with the information you had. That mistake you mock in someone else. They were making bets in the fog, just like you. Third, documentation. Write your thoughts before the outcome arrives. Record what you really believe, what you truly expect, before the answer appears. And when the future unfolds, compare your memory to your record. You'll be shocked by the gap. Shocked by how different the story becomes when memory isn't allowed to edit the tape. Because without records, your mind is the unreliable narrator of your life. It whispers, see, you knew it, when really, you only knew it because it happened. The hindsight bias loop is not just a trick of memory. It's a mirror that shows you the past with the future painted in. It's the voice that says you were always right or always wrong, but never uncertain. And that's the real danger. Not the fact that you didn't know, but the illusion that you always did. That's how we blind ourselves. That's how we stay trapped. Not by forgetting the past, but by pretending we never did. The pattern illusion glitch. You're lying in a field, staring up at the clouds. One drifts past. It looks like a dog. The next, a dragon. Then, a perfect human face. You blink, smile, maybe even point it out to someone nearby. But the truth is, there is no dog, no dragon, no face. Just vapor, light, and motion. Still, your brain insists, there's something there. A shape, a pattern, a story. That is the pattern illusion glitch. This isn't some quirky brain trick. It's a core feature of your cognition, a feature that once kept your ancestors alive, but now feeds illusions that warp your perception of reality. Your mind is designed to find order in randomness, meaning in mess, and connection in chaos. Because once upon a time, seeing a predator in the bushes, when it might have just been wind, was the difference between survival and extinction. And that ancient fear lingers. You still flinch at creaking floorboards, still see faces in tree bark, still hear your phone buzz when it didn't. Because your brain would rather see a pattern that isn't there than miss one that is. This is called apophenia. And it's not just harmless. It's the root of superstition, conspiracy, magical thinking, and even madness. You toss a coin 10 times. It lands heads 8 times. You feel something stir in your chest. That shouldn't happen. It must mean something, right? Maybe the coin is rigged. Maybe it's a sign. But probability has no memory. Randomness doesn't care. Still, you search for the hidden thread, the secret code, the deeper truth. And this need to turn noise into signal drives you again and again into mental traps that feel like logic but are really illusions. You walk into a casino. The lights flash. A machine beeps. Someone screams in joy. You pull a lever, win once, twice, then lose 10 times in a row. But you keep playing. Because the patterns feel real. The machines are programmed to mimic near misses, to light up your brain's reward circuits, to make you feel like you're almost there. But there is no almost. There's only code. And yet your mind creates the illusion of rhythm, of closeness, of luck. This glitch affects memory too. You recall a dream, then something in your day echoes it. A word, a stranger's face, a song, and suddenly, it feels like fate. But it's not fate. It's pattern seeking. Your brain is constantly scanning for matches. And when it finds one, it lights up. You feel something meaningful has happened. Like the universe is whispering. But it's not the universe. It's your mind, mapping chaos into coherence. Think of constellations. Look up at the stars. Random dots scattered across infinity. But humans connect them into bears and warriors and serpents and gods. The night sky becomes a canvas of myth. Not because it was drawn that way, but because we need it to be. We cannot live in randomness. We have to impose shape, even if that shape is a lie. Even language itself is a pattern illusion. You read letters, words, sentences, symbols on a screen. They mean something. But to a child who hasn't learned to read, it's just squiggles. Meaning isn't embedded in the ink. It's constructed by your brain. Every metaphor, every joke, every story, it's your pattern recognition system working overtime. The same mechanism that lets you recognize a friend's voice in a crowd can also trick you into hearing hidden messages in static. This is how conspiracy theories thrive. You notice two people posting the same opinion. You connect the dots. Then a third, then a fourth. Soon, it feels like a movement, a signal, a plot. But maybe it's just a coincidence. A glitch in the algorithm. A product of bias. But once your mind sees the pattern, it resists being convinced otherwise. Because patterns give comfort. They give control. And randomness feels like chaos. People crave control. And pattern illusions offer the illusion of control. That's why gamblers develop rituals. Athletes wear lucky socks. Students sit in the same seat for every exam. These behaviors aren't logical, but they feel stabilizing. Because if there's a pattern, then maybe there's predictability. And if there's predictability, maybe there's safety. But that comfort comes at a cost. You begin to distrust real randomness. You fear the chaos. You invent gods to explain the weather, curses to explain your failures, signs to explain your heartbreaks. You attribute meaning to license plates, clock numbers, repeated names. But sometimes the coincidence is just a coincidence. And the need to believe otherwise is where delusion begins. Pattern illusion also fuels paranoia. You overhear someone laughing. You assume they're laughing at you. You hear the same phrase from two strangers. You feel watched, targeted, chosen. But it's projection. Your mind, desperate for clarity, has turned disjointed data into a story. And now that story owns you. It's why people spiral into thought loops. Why some descend into psychosis. Because when you believe too deeply in patterns, you lose your grip on reality itself. It's also why people fall in love. You meet someone. They like the same music. They've read your favorite book. You both love rain. You both hate small talk. It feels like destiny. But how many others shared those traits and passed unnoticed? Your brain filtered them out. But this one matched just enough, triggered just enough neural fireworks, that it registered as fate. As meant to be. It isn't love at first sight. It's pattern recognition at first spike. The pattern illusion glitch is beautiful. Terrifying. Inevitable. It makes us human. It allows us to create art, music, philosophy. It's the reason we can appreciate harmony, symmetry, rhythm. It's why poetry moves us, why films can make us cry. Because we recognize emotional arcs, relational dynamics, mirrored narratives. The glitch is not a defect. It's the basis of imagination. But it's also the basis of delusion. So what can you do? You don't shut it off. You can't. Instead, you become aware of it. You watch your mind spin stories from fragments. You catch yourself turning chance into fate. You question the voice that says, this must mean something. You let yourself sit, however briefly, in the discomfort of unpatterned reality. And you learn to tell the difference between truth and the itch for meaning. Because not everything is a sign. Not every dream is a prophecy. Not every coincidence is a message. Sometimes the cloud is just a cloud. The number just a number. The silence just silence. But the fact that you searched for meaning in all of it, that's what makes you magnificent. The mental shortcuts effect. You make decisions every day, hundreds of them. What to wear, what to eat, which route to take, who to trust, what to believe. And with each choice, you imagine you're being thoughtful, deliberate, maybe even rational. But beneath that illusion of control, something else is at play, something ancient, automatic, and invisible. Your brain is not wired for truth. It's wired for speed. And that speed comes at a cost. This is the mental shortcuts effect. The quiet, invisible mechanism that drives most of your choices without you ever realizing it. At its core lies a collection of cognitive shortcuts called heuristics, mental rules of thumb, fast approximations. They exist for a reason, survival. When you're facing a lion, you don't calculate angles or measure velocity, you run. When food is scarce, you don't compare nutritional labels, you eat what's available. Heuristics were never meant to be perfect. They were meant to be fast enough. But in a world of nuance, noise, and complexity, fast enough often becomes dangerously flawed. Let's start with a simple example. Imagine you're shopping for a new blender. You're not an expert. You don't have time to read every review, so your brain takes a shortcut. You pick the most expensive one. Why? Because expensive must mean better, right? That's the price heuristic. A shortcut that says, if it costs more, it must be higher quality. But is it true? Not always. And when it's not, the shortcut betrays you. Or take the availability heuristic. You hear about a plane crash on the news, and suddenly flying feels unsafe. But statistically, you're far more likely to die in a car accident. Still, your brain trusts what's vivid, emotional, and recent over what's logical or likely. It's not because you're irrational. It's because your brain is designed to feel first, think later. Now imagine this playing out on a larger scale. You meet someone with a confident tone and a clean suit, and you instantly trust them. That's the halo effect. You assume one good trait. Confidence means they must also be competent, honest, trustworthy. But confidence can be faked. Charm can be strategic. The shortcut makes the wrong leap. You're not thinking. You're reacting. And the more tired, rushed, or overwhelmed you are, the more your brain leans on these shortcuts. Because real thinking? It's slow. It burns energy. It takes effort. Your brain is like a stingy accountant. It wants to save cognitive fuel. So it cuts corners, trims the path, and builds shortcuts that feel like truth, but aren't. And here's where it gets dangerous. Because the world you live in today is not the world your brain evolved in. Your ancestors made snap judgments to stay alive. But now, those same instincts can lead you straight into manipulation. Advertisers know you trust what's familiar, so they repeat jingles, logos, slogans, until your brain tags them as safe. Politicians know you fear the unfamiliar, so they use fear to bypass your reasoning. Social media platforms know you crave cognitive ease, so they feed you more of what you already believe, reinforcing shortcuts with algorithmic comfort. What was once survival is now sabotage. Consider the representativeness heuristic. You meet someone quiet, bookish, and articulate, and your brain immediately thinks, librarian. But what if that person is actually a professional poker player? Your mind, trained on stereotypes, ignores probability and defaults to the most familiar pattern. And then there's the anchoring effect. You see a jacket marked at 10,000 Indian rupees, then discounted to 5,000 Indian rupees. You feel like you're getting a deal, even if 5,000 Indian rupees is still overpriced. That initial number anchors your expectation, warping your judgment. Your brain doesn't reset. It adjusts from the anchor. These shortcuts are not always wrong. In many cases, they're useful. They save time. They reduce effort. They help you navigate complexity without burning out. But the problem is not that shortcuts exist. The problem is that you don't realize when you're using them. They blend into the background, shaping your choices silently. And when you trust them blindly, they betray you in subtle, devastating ways. They make you trust liars who look confident. They make you fear what's rare and ignore what's common. They make you overvalue the flashy and overlook the quiet truth. They make you believe that quick feels right, when it's actually just easy. But here's the uncomfortable part. Even knowing about these shortcuts doesn't always protect you. Because awareness lives in the slow part of your brain, while heuristics live in the fast lane. And speed wins. You may realize the trick a moment too late. After the purchase, after the decision, after the regret. So what can you do? You slow down. You learn to pause between stimulus and response. You question the feeling that arrives too quickly, the certainty that feels too smooth, the confidence that appears before evidence. You train yourself to ask, why do I believe this? What am I basing it on? Could this be a shortcut in disguise? Because the moment you notice the pattern, you create a crack in its armor. And through that crack, truth has a chance to slip in. Remember this. Your brain is a brilliant liar in love with efficiency. It would rather be fast than right. But life isn't a race. And the best decisions, the ones that shape your future, are almost never the easiest ones. So resist the shortcut. Embrace the slow path. The hard questions. The uncomfortable pause. Because real clarity isn't what arrives quickly. It's what survives doubt. And the truth? It doesn't live in your reflexes. It lives in your reflection. The in-group bubble bias. You walk into a room and scan it, even if you don't realize you're doing it. You notice who looks like you, who sounds like you, who dresses, thinks, speaks like you. And in less than a second, without meaning to, your brain whispers, "These are my people." And just as quickly, it draws a quiet, invisible line, a border between us and them. This is the in-group bubble bias, a lens through which your mind distorts the world. A trick of perception that doesn't just shape who you trust, but how you think, how you feel, how you judge. It's not new. It's not rare. It's human. Thousands of years ago, identifying your tribe was a matter of survival. Those who stayed loyal to their group had better odds, safety in numbers, protection from outsiders, cooperation in scarcity. So evolution sharpened this instinct. The closer someone seemed to us, the more empathy, trust, and patience you extended. The more other they seemed, the easier it became to withdraw, ignore, or even attack. And even though the threats have changed, no longer wild beasts or rival villages, the reflex remains. Stronger than ever, and quieter than ever. Because the in-group bubble isn't loud. It doesn't shout slogans or wave flags. It whispers comfort. It says, "We're the good ones." It says, "We're smarter." It says, "We're right." And in that comfort, truth becomes optional. You watch your team make mistakes, and you rationalize. You hear your group say something cruel, and you minimize. You see someone from their side suffer, and something in you recoils less. Not because you're heartless, but because your heart has been trained to beat louder for your own. Think about how this shows up in everyday life. In politics, you notice the flaws in the other party, but excuse them in yours. You mock their scandals, but defend your own leaders with mental gymnastics. In social circles, you forgive a friend for something you'd criticize in a stranger. You assume good intentions when your group stumbles, and bad intentions when someone outside does the same thing. Even in global tragedies, a bombing in a foreign land feels distant. A natural disaster in a familiar country feels personal. The difference? Proximity to your bubble. And here's the dangerous part. The bias doesn't just protect your group. It inflates it. It creates a myth that your side is more moral, more informed, more evolved. It's why online spaces become echo chambers. Why communities radicalize. Why cults form. Why nations go to war. Because once the bubble hardens, empathy shrinks. And when empathy shrinks, cruelty becomes easier. The science backs this up. Studies show people literally feel less pain when someone outside their group is hurt. Brain scans light up differently. Our wiring has been trained to allocate empathy selectively. Not by logic, not by justice, but by familiarity. So what happens when we live inside this bias for too long? We become less curious. We stop asking questions. We stop listening. We start assuming that anyone who disagrees is wrong, broken, evil, or stupid. We confuse group loyalty with moral clarity. We stop seeing people and start seeing caricatures. It's not just psychological. It's political, cultural, existential. It's why neighbors can stop talking. Why families split. Why debate dies. Why war feels justifiable. Because once they are no longer human, once they are simply wrong by default, anything feels justified. But here's what the in-group bubble doesn't tell you. The other side has a bubble too. They think they're the good ones. They feel just as certain, just as proud, just as right. To them, you are the other. And in that mirror, everything fractures. So how do you escape? Not by pretending the bias doesn't exist, but by naming it, watching it, disarming it, by asking yourself in every conflict, would I feel the same way if someone from my group had said this? Would I be as forgiving? Would I be as angry? Would I be as curious? Would I see this person as wrong, or just outside my comfort? Because that's the first step toward breaking the illusion. Empathy doesn't mean abandoning your values. It means refusing to weaponize them. It means recognizing that your group isn't always right. That truth doesn't wear a uniform. That decency doesn't belong to one tribe. And maybe most of all, that connection begins the moment you stop needing to be superior and start being willing to understand. The in-group bubble is comfortable, but comfort isn't clarity, and pride isn't truth. If you want to see the world as it is, if you want to grow, connect, build, forgive, You have to let the bubble pop. Because outside the bubble, something extraordinary happens. You see the human in the other. And slowly, quietly, they see the human in you. That's where change begins. Not with us versus them, but with the courage to say, there is no them. There's only all of us. The availability echo. A plane crashes, and suddenly, you're afraid of flying. You see one news story about a shark attack, and beaches feel dangerous. A single case of food poisoning, and that restaurant goes on your never again list. You don't run the numbers. You don't check the odds. You just remember the story, and let it rewrite your sense of reality. This is the availability echo. The psychological illusion where the easier something comes to mind, the more true, frequent, or dangerous it feels. Not because it is, but because it's available to memory. Your mind isn't built to process probability. It's built to notice what stands out, what shocks, what sticks, and what sticks echoes. Imagine this. You're asked, are there more words in English that start with the letter K, or have K as the third letter? You think about it. Words like kangaroo, kite, king jump into your mind. So, you say, definitely more that start with K. But you're wrong. Statistically, there are far more with K in the third position. But those aren't easy to recall. They don't echo. So they feel rare, even when they aren't. This is the availability bias at work. It hijacks your sense of frequency, of truth, of reality. And it's everywhere. You hear about violent crimes on the news, so you think the world is getting more dangerous, when statistically, many places are safer than they were decades ago. You hear about one celebrity who died of a rare disease, and suddenly that disease is burned into your fear circuitry, more than the common killers like heart disease or diabetes. You see one person get rich quick with crypto or drop shipping or day trading, and you assume that's the path to freedom, never noticing the thousands who lost everything chasing that same dream. But vivid isn't accurate. Loud isn't likely. Viral doesn't mean valid. Still, your brain can't help it. Evolution wired it for survival, not statistics. In the wild, if one person in your tribe was eaten by a lion, you didn't need a peer-reviewed study to know lions were dangerous. A single vivid story, one echo, was enough to change behavior. That wiring persists. But now, the jungle isn't nature. It's the media, the algorithm, the comment section, the breaking news banner. And it's louder than ever. The more sensational the story, the more airtime it gets. The more you hear it, the more available it becomes. And the more available it is, the more you believe it reflects reality. So if the media focuses on plane crashes, you fear flying more than driving, despite driving being exponentially more dangerous. If social media floods your feed with breakups, betrayals, and heartbreak, you start to think love is a trap. If every viral post is about corrupt politicians or cheating spouses or failed businesses, you start to believe optimism is naivety. And that belief, that quiet shift in how you view the world, isn't based on fact. It's based on availability, on what echoes in your mind. Think about your own life. You remember that one time you were humiliated in class, not the dozens of times you spoke without incident. You replay the breakup that shattered you, not the many moments of love that came before it. You hold on to that one rejection letter, that one harsh comment, that one night of failure, and suddenly, those memories define you. But they're not the whole story. They're just the loudest echoes. And the mind, tragically, doesn't measure volume, it obeys it. That's why arguments don't get resolved with logic. Why prejudice persists. Why stereotypes survive. Because a single powerful anecdote feels more persuasive than a mountain of data. You say, I know someone who, and that becomes the proof. Even when it's the exception. You say, I heard this happen to a friend of a friend, and suddenly, it's your warning sign. You say, it's all over the news, forgetting the news is curated, selected, amplified, not to inform you, but to engage you. And engagement isn't truth. It's availability. So what do? First, pause. Notice the feeling when something seems true because it's vivid, not because it's verified. When you think, this always happens, ask, does it really? Or does it just feel that way because I remember it well? Second, interrogate your memories. What are you forgetting? What quieter truths have been drowned out by louder moments? Maybe the one betrayal hurt, but what about the trust that's never broken? Maybe one failure scarred you, but what about the 100 silent successes? Third, diversify your inputs. If all your stories come from one feed, one group, one worldview. Your mind becomes an echo chamber. You don't just hear the same things, you believe them harder. Because they're more available, but not more real. Because here's the truth. Your brain is a spotlight, not a camera. It doesn't record life with neutral precision. It highlights what glows. And the things that glow, trauma, drama, extremes, tend to distort everything else. You aren't broken for thinking this way. You're human. You're wired for story, for impression, for repetition. But you can become conscious of the echo. You can question the headline that feels too true. You can take one vivid memory and ask, is this the rule or the exception? That question alone can break the spell. Because once you realize that the loudest thoughts aren't always the truest ones, you begin to listen for the quiet. And in that quiet, you might finally hear reality whisper back. The doorframe framing effect. You walk into a room, and someone asks, why did you fail? You pause. Your mind starts sifting through reasons, laziness, distraction, bad timing. But then someone else asks, what made success difficult in that moment? And suddenly, everything shifts. The question is softer, more spacious. It doesn't accuse, it investigates. It opens a new door. This is the doorframe framing effect, a cognitive illusion where the way a question is asked shapes the way you think. Not just the answer you give, but the very thoughts your brain makes available to you. Language is not neutral. It is architecture. And the moment you step through its doorway, your entire view is framed by its shape. Take this example. Two doctors. Same scenario. Both look at a cancer treatment. One tells the patient, this treatment has a 90% survival rate. The other says, this treatment has a 10% mortality rate. Same math, same truth. But the first feels hopeful. The second feels grim. And research shows patients respond differently, emotionally, even physically, based on that framing. Because the human mind doesn't process raw data. It processes meaning. And meaning is shaped by context, by angle, by doorframe. Now consider the courtroom. A lawyer asks, how fast was the car going when it smashed into the other vehicle? Versus, how fast was the car going when it contacted the other vehicle? That one word, smashed, paints a scene. It implies force, danger, damage. Witnesses shown the same footage recalled different speeds, different damage, even broken glass that wasn't there. Because the question doesn't just extract memory, it builds it. This happens every day. A manager asks, why are you always late? And your brain rushes to justify guilt. But if they had asked, what's been making it difficult to be on time lately? The door opens to causes, not blame. To reflection, not defense. And it's not just others who frame your mind. You do it to yourself. You fail at something and ask, what's wrong with me? And that question poisons the search. But if you ask, what am I missing that could help me succeed next time? Now the brain looks for tools, not flaws. Solutions, not shame. The framing effect is not a trick. It's not manipulation. It's a structural truth of how thinking works. A question is not just an invitation to answer. It is a path. And the path you walk shapes the landscape you see. In politics, this becomes dangerous. Frame taxes as supporting social infrastructure, and people lean left. Frame the same tax as punishment for hard work, and they lean right. The facts don't change. The doorframe does. In health campaigns, tell people, you have a 70% chance of staying alive if you quit smoking, and they're more motivated. Tell them, you have a 30% chance of dying even if you quit, and their motivation dies with it. Same numbers, different doors. Even in memory, this effect echoes. Ask someone, how happy were you in high school? They'll reflect a certain way. But ask, what were the struggles you faced in high school? And the whole narrative bends. Memory is plastic. Language is the mold. And here's the loop. You answer a question, and that answer becomes a belief. The belief shapes your future questions. Those questions shape your future beliefs. Over time, you're no longer just thinking. You're reinforcing a frame you didn't choose. You're living inside a house of language, built by questions that cornered you from the start. But the doorframe effect doesn't only distort, it also offers freedom. Because once you see it, you can step back. You can choose the frame before stepping through the door. You can ask, is this question helping me grow, or just making me feel small? Is this framing locking me in, or opening me up? And maybe that's where transformation begins. Not with new answers, but with better questions. Questions that don't shame, but explore. Questions that don't narrow, but expand. Because thought doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in rooms. And every room has a doorway. Every doorway has a frame. And every frame has power. So next time you feel trapped by your own thoughts, check the door you walked through. Who built it? What words carved its shape? And what other rooms might exist, just outside its reach? Because your mind is a mansion. But most of us live in just one room. Not because the others are locked, but because we never question the question. That's the framing effect. That's the doorway of thought. And it's not about what you know. It's about what you're allowed to see. The loss aversion grip. You find a $5 bill on the street. It sparks a small joy, a smile, a quick mental calculation of what you'll buy. It feels good. But now imagine you lose that same $5. The sting is sharper. You check your pockets again. You retrace your steps. The emotion isn't mild. It's aggravating, even disproportionate. Why? Because your brain doesn't treat gains and losses equally. It weighs losses heavier. This is the loss aversion grip. A cognitive grip so powerful, it quietly governs your decisions, your risks, your relationships, and your life's potential. Loss aversion isn't just a quirky habit. It's a deep-rooted evolutionary survival mechanism. Imagine early humans navigating harsh landscapes with limited resources. Losing a single meal could mean death. Gaining an extra one was nice, but not urgent. So the mind evolved to fear loss more than it chased gain. Fast forward to today, and though your environment has changed, your wiring hasn't. That's why you might cling to a terrible job rather than risk applying for a better one. Or why investors irrationally hold on to falling stocks, hoping they'll rebound, because selling would mean locking in a loss. It's not logic that's stopping you. It's biology. The fear of letting go outweighs the possibility of moving forward. And this fear isn't minor. It's been quantified. Studies show that the psychological impact of losing something is roughly twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining it. Meaning, a $100 loss feels like a punch in the gut. But a $100 gain, it's a gentle pat on the back. The scales are rigged. Your brain was never playing fair. This imbalance drives behaviors you might not even recognize as loss aversion. Take relationships, for example. People often stay in toxic dynamics not because they're fulfilling, but because leaving feels like giving something up. Time invested, memories made, future dreams. The idea of losing what could have been is enough to keep people trapped in what is. Marketers know this too. That only 2 left in stock tag on a product page, that countdown timer ticking away during a sale, they're not about urgency, they're about loss. You're not buying because you want the item. You're buying because you fear losing the chance. Scarcity triggers the primal fear of missing out. You feel cornered, and so you act. Even your self-image is held hostage by this bias. You'd rather maintain a flawed but familiar identity than risk the discomfort of becoming someone new. Because change demands letting go of habits, beliefs, reputations. And the brain whispers, what if you lose everything and gain nothing? This is how dreams die quietly, not through failure, but through hesitation, through overvaluing what you have now and undervaluing what you could have. It's the reason so many people choose security over growth, certainty over joy, familiar misery over unfamiliar freedom. And here's the cruel twist. Loss aversion doesn't even protect you. It feels like a shield, but often becomes a cage. By avoiding short-term discomfort, you invite long-term regret. You say no to love because you're afraid of heartbreak. No to travel because you fear getting lost. No to opportunity because you fear failing publicly. But in saying no, you guarantee a different kind of loss, the loss of becoming. Even in small, daily decisions, the grip holds tight. You keep clothes you never wear because throwing them out feels wasteful. You finish a bad movie because you've already watched an hour. You eat food you don't enjoy because you paid for it. It's called the sunk cost fallacy, the illusion that past investment should dictate future action. But it's just another mask of loss aversion. Loss aversion distorts perception. You might interpret a neutral event as negative simply because of what you feared losing. For example, not getting a promotion feels worse if you were expecting it, even if your situation hasn't actually changed. The gap between what you have and what you hoped for creates perceived loss, and your mind reacts as if something was stolen from you. Disappointment becomes injury. So how do you fight it? You don't eliminate the grip, but you can loosen it by recognizing it. When you find yourself hesitating, not because something is wrong, but because you're afraid of what you might lose. Pause. Ask, am I protecting myself from harm or from discomfort? Practice reframing. Instead of seeing risk as a potential loss, see it as a bridge. Every gain has a cost, but not every cost is loss. Sometimes it's an exchange. You let go of certainty to gain possibility. You shed one identity to try on another. You give up something small for the chance at something greater. Train your brain to value learning over winning. In this frame, failure is not a loss, it's a discovery, and discoveries always move you forward. Also, pay attention to emotional anchoring. Just because something has been with you, an object, a belief, a routine, doesn't mean it serves you. Letting go doesn't mean you lost. It means you chose. Because in the end, your life will not be defined by what you kept. It will be defined by what you chose to release in order to evolve. The loss aversion grip is real. It whispers that safety is found in staying still. That letting go is weakness. That change is loss. But those are lies wrapped in instinct. Letting go is not failure. It's flight. The sunk cost snare. You hold on tighter, not because it's working, but because you've already given so much. The time, the effort, the late nights, the apologies, the money, the hope. It feels like if you quit now, it will all have been for nothing. So you keep going, even as the ground beneath you cracks, even as the truth becomes harder to ignore. You tell yourself it's loyalty. You call it perseverance. But what if it's something else entirely? What if it's the sunk cost snare? A silent trap that doesn't feel like a trap. One that doesn't restrain your body, but entangles your judgment. It convinces you to keep walking deeper into a forest you should have left behind, simply because you've already taken too many steps. This isn't just a feeling. It's a well-documented cognitive bias. The sunk cost fallacy. The flawed belief that past investments should dictate future decisions. But the past is a cost already paid. Time you'll never get back. Money you'll never recover. Energy already spent. Logically, those things should not weigh on your next move. But emotionally, they feel heavy, like anchors. And so the snare tightens. You stay in a job that's draining the life out of you, not because it's right, but because you've already spent 5 years climbing the ladder. You stay in a relationship that's slowly hollowing you out, not because love remains, but because you've sacrificed so much already. You stick with a project, a business, a dream that's clearly falling apart, all because it once mattered, and you can't bear the thought of letting it die. But sacrifice is not the same as progress. Endurance is not always wisdom. And pouring more into a broken cup doesn't make it whole. Think of a gambler at a roulette table. He's already lost 10,000 Indian rupees. He thinks, if I just play one more round, maybe I'll win it back. But what he's really doing is throwing good money after bad, blinded by the desire to justify his loss. That's the sunk cost effect in its purest form. The illusion of recovery. The hunger for redemption. The refusal to admit that the smartest choice is to walk away. Now apply this logic to your life. How many times have you kept chasing something, not because it was still right for you, but because it once was? How often have you mistaken stubbornness for strength? We're taught to admire those who never give up, to romanticize struggle, to applaud people who fight through adversity. And yes, persistence has its place. But the sunk cost snare wears a similar mask. It dresses itself in the same language: loyalty, dedication, sacrifice. It whispers, don't quit now. You're too far in. Don't waste what you've already given. But what if the real waste is what you're still giving? We don't like to think we were wrong. We don't like to admit we stayed too long. So we rewrite the story. We paint our losses as steps towards some greater reward. We call them necessary. We call them noble. But sometimes they're just losses. And sometimes the wisest thing you can do is to cut them loose. It's not weakness. It's clarity. Letting go doesn't mean you failed. It means you recognized when something stopped serving your growth. It means you respected your future more than your past. It means you refused to keep living inside a story that no longer made sense. And that's terrifying. Because the moment you walk away, you're forced to face the grief, not just of what didn't work, but of the identity you build around it. The version of you who believed in that job, that person, that dream. And saying goodbye to that version of yourself can feel like death. But it's not. It's rebirth. Ask yourself this. If I hadn't already invested anything in this, time, money, love, effort, would I choose it now? Would I still stay? Would I still fight for it? If the answer is no, then you're not choosing from truth. You're choosing from fear. Fear of loss. Fear of waste. Fear of regret. But regret doesn't come from walking away. It comes from staying stuck. So look at your life with brutal honesty. Look at the places where you're pushing forward, not because they're right, but because you're terrified of what it means to stop. Ask yourself, am I building or am I just bleeding? Because there's a difference between planting roots and sinking. There's a difference between fighting for something that can grow and drowning in something that already died. And in the end, the past is a receipt, not a map. It shows what you paid, not where you should go. So if you find yourself trapped in the sunk cost snare, remember this. You are not your sacrifices. You are not the time you gave away. You are not the effort they never appreciated. You are not the dream that stopped dreaming back. You are what you choose now. And freedom begins the moment you stop throwing more into the fire and start walking toward the light, even if your hands are still warm from the burn. The actor-observer discrepancy. You're driving home late, tired, mind buzzing from the day. Someone cuts you off. No signal. No warning. Your hands tighten on the wheel. What a jerk, you mutter. You imagine their whole personality from that single moment. Rude, reckless, selfish. You judge them completely based on one mistake. But minutes later, you miss a turn. You swerve slightly, accidentally cutting someone else off. You glance in the mirror, wave apologetically. Sorry, you think, I didn't see that lane, it was dark. That wasn't like me. This is the actor-observer discrepancy. The mental trick that allows you to be both judge and lawyer in the same courtroom. Harsh and unforgiving toward others. Gentle and understanding with yourself. It's the double standard your brain runs on autopilot. When someone else fails, you point to their character. They were careless. They're lazy. They're toxic. They're irresponsible. But when you fail, it was the situation. It was the pressure. It was the misunderstanding. It was just that one time. This isn't selfishness. It's wiring. Because you live inside your own mind. You have access to every excuse, every pressure, every moment of fatigue, pain, fear, or confusion that led to your action. You see the backstage. But with others, you only see the performance, and you judge them for it. This bias affects everything, from petty arguments to international politics. Think of a couple fighting. One forgets to pick up the groceries. The other says, "You never care about what I ask. You're always so selfish." But when they forget to return a call later that week, it wasn't on purpose. I just had a crazy day. Same action, different judgment. One about who the person is, the other about what was happening to them. Or in the workplace, a colleague misses a deadline. You think they're disorganized. But when you miss one, there were so many unexpected meetings this week. You're not lying, but you are filtering reality to suit your narrative. Because to judge others, you need certainty. To forgive yourself, you need context. And the more you do this, the more it shapes your worldview. You begin to feel morally superior because you're not like them. You don't make those kinds of choices. You're not that kind of person. You're trying your best. And so, empathy erodes. Slowly, you become less forgiving, less patient, less curious about what might be behind someone's behavior. You build a world of cardboard villains and complex heroes, where the only complex one is you. But what if you reversed it? What if, just for a moment, you assumed that they had a story too? That their bad mood had a reason? That their failure wasn't proof of a flaw, but maybe a symptom of something heavier? A fight you didn't witness, a grief they didn't name, a pressure they didn't show. What if the person who snapped at you in the elevator had just lost someone they loved? What if the rude cashier was in pain but couldn't afford to miss work? What if the person who ghosted you was drowning in shame and didn't know how to speak? You don't know what's behind someone's behavior, but the actor-observer discrepancy convinces you that you do. And it's not just about kindness. It's about truth. Because this bias also protects your ego. It keeps you from seeing your patterns. It lets you off the hook again and again. You stop growing because your failures always have a good reason. You stop apologizing because your mistakes were circumstantial, but they weren't always. Sometimes you were careless. Sometimes you were unkind. Sometimes you were wrong. And if you can't admit that, then you live in a world where everyone else is flawed except you. That's not just unfair. It's lonely. Real connection requires humility. It requires you to say, I mess up too. I make poor choices. And I want to be better. It requires you to look at someone else's worst moment and say, I've been there. Maybe not in the same way, but I've stumbled too. Because the truth is, everyone is walking through something. Everyone is carrying baggage you can't see. Everyone is the hero of their own story and the villain in someone else's. And when you acknowledge that, when you give others the same grace you give yourself, you begin to see people, not problems. You stop dividing the world into good and bad. You start noticing the nuance, the humanity. And in that shift, you create space for understanding, for healing, for change. The actor-observer discrepancy wants you to believe you are uniquely complex and everyone else is simple. But the truth is, we are all complicated. We are all layered. We are all doing the best we can, most of the time, with what we have. So the next time someone messes up, before you name their character, ask yourself, what would I hope someone assumed about me? And then choose that, not because they deserve it, but because empathy isn't earned. It's extended. And sometimes, all it takes to break the bias is to remember that behind every face, even the rude one, even the reckless one, even the cold one, is someone just trying to make it through the day, just like you. The choice overload fog. You walk into a store to buy shampoo. One item on your list. Simple. But the shelf is a jungle. Volumizing, strengthening, anti-dandruff, sulfate-free, tea tree, coconut, keratin, for curls, for color, for shine, for repair. You stand there, scanning bottle after bottle, and suddenly, your brain stalls. Minutes pass. You walk out with nothing. Or you grab the nearest one, not because it's best, but because you're exhausted. This is the choice overload fog. It's the strange, suffocating paralysis that sets in when your mind is forced to navigate too many options, each one whispering possibility, each one demanding attention. What you thought was freedom becomes friction. 1,000 open doors, and you freeze in the hallway. We're told choice is power, that the more options you have, the freer you are. That freedom lies in abundance. But the truth? There's a limit. And beyond that limit, choice doesn't liberate, it cripples. Psychologists call it decision fatigue. Neuroscientists track it in brain scans. Your prefrontal cortex, the seat of reason and planning, begins to dim when the choices pile too high. And when that happens, your judgment decays. Your confidence dips. And you fall into 3 dangerous traps. First, you make worse decisions. Faced with 10 options, you analyze. Faced with 50, you shortcut. You go with what's familiar. What looks best? What has the flashiest packaging? Not what's right, but what's easiest to pick. Your brain, overwhelmed, lowers the standard for what qualifies as good enough. Second, you avoid the decision entirely. You scroll through streaming apps, see hundreds of movies, and watch none. You sit down to write, but you don't know what to start with, so you clean your room instead. You delay, deflect, procrastinate. Because even starting feels like stepping into fog. Third, you regret the decision you finally make. Even if you do choose, that decision doesn't bring relief, it brings doubt. What if the other option was better? What if you missed out? What if you chose wrong? And now, the joy of choice is poisoned by the weight of what wasn't chosen. This isn't weakness. It's wiring. The human mind evolved in a world of limited options. You hunted what was available. You ate what was ripe. You partnered with the tribe. You weren't picking between 16 types of almond milk or 30 meditation apps. Your decisions were fewer, but more meaningful. But now, choice is endless. You can learn anything, go anywhere, date anyone, build any life. Sounds amazing, until you're staring down the abyss of endless possible selves, and suddenly, you're no one. You ask, should I pursue my passion or follow security? Should I start a business or get a job? Should I settle down or explore? Should I say yes or wait for something better? And beneath every question is the silent terror. What if I choose wrong? So you delay. You draft 10 versions of your life in your head, play them on repeat, and live none of them. Because with every added choice comes added pressure to make the perfect one. And perfection is paralyzing. You don't want to just choose. You want to optimize, to predict regret, to see the whole chessboard 10 moves ahead. But you can't. Because life doesn't work that way. It's not a science of certainty. It's an art of commitment. And commitment, real commitment, means loss. When you choose one thing, you say no to everything else. That hurts. That's grief. That's why choice overload isn't just mental fog. It's emotional weight. Every path not taken whispers what if. And if you're not careful, those whispers become chains. But here's the secret. Freedom doesn't come from having every option. It comes from having the right constraints. A sculptor doesn't complain about the limits of stone. A poet doesn't mourn the limits of language. They use limits to create, to focus, to choose meaningfully. And you can too. The fog begins to lift the moment you shift your focus from what could be to what matters most. Ask yourself, what do I want to feel, not just achieve? What will I be proud of 5 years from now? What option helps me grow, even if it scares me? Let those questions cut through the noise. Let them carve away the excess. Because the truth is, not all choices deserve equal weight. Some are distractions dressed as opportunity. And the mind is not built to weigh them all at once. So make space. Simplify. Limit your menu. Curate your inputs. Let go of the myth that you need more options to find better outcomes. Sometimes, you need fewer doors to find the right one. Because in the fog of too much, your vision dims. But when you choose clearly, not perfectly, the path begins to emerge. And it's not about choosing right. It's about choosing fully. The default bias drift. You open a new app. A screen appears. Allow notifications. You pause, but only for a second. Then you tap allow. Not because you want the noise. Not because you need the alerts. But because it's the default. The highlighted option. The path of least resistance. The one you were meant to choose. This is the default bias drift. A silent force that pulls your decisions not toward what's best, but toward what's easiest. What's already chosen for you. And you think you made the decision. But did you? Or did you just drift into it? We like to believe that our choices come from careful thought, from analysis, from values. But more often, they come from exhaustion, from fatigue, from a quiet surrender to the status quo. You stay in a job you hate, not because it's right, but because the resignation letter is still unsent. The LinkedIn profile still half finished. The future's still unclear. So you default to the present, even if it's slowly eating you. You stay in a relationship that no longer grows. Not because there's love left, but because the breakup talk sounds exhausting. The loneliness after, unbearable. So you stay, you drift, because default feels safer than disruption. Even in life's smallest corners, this bias runs deep. You order the same meal, sit in the same seat, wear the same style, use the same settings on your phone, your browser, your life. Not because these are the best options, but because they're already there. And in a world flooded with decisions, every unmade choice feels like a mercy. But here's the cost. Default bias is a thief. It steals your agency. It trades possibility for comfort. And it wraps your life in the illusion of choice, while silently scripting your every move. Think of organ donation. In countries where people are automatically registered as donors unless they opt out, participation rates skyrocket. But where the default is non-donor unless you opt in, those rates plummet. Same humans, same beliefs, different defaults. The difference between saving lives and walking away from them is nothing more than the position of a radio button. And it's not just digital menus and policy forms. It's your identity, your beliefs, your habits. You inherit ideas from your parents, your teachers, your culture. You grow up with a default worldview about money, morality, love, power. And unless you question it, you live it. You pass it on. You become not a person, but a pattern, a continuation of a default no one ever questioned. And here's where it becomes a loop. The more defaults you accept, the less comfortable you are with change. And the less comfortable you are with change, the more you cling to default. Inaction becomes identity. Stagnation becomes safety. You start telling yourself, I'm just not the kind of person who takes risks. I'm too old to start over. I'm not good with change. But what if that's not who you are? What if that's just the voice of the default talking? What if the real you is still buried under years of automatic choices? Because that's the truth we avoid. Every default is someone else's design. Every pre-checked box, every suggested setting, every recommended for you option, it's a decision already made by someone who profits from your passivity. So the question isn't, do I like this option? It's, did I choose this? Or did I drift into it because it was easier? And maybe that's the most dangerous part. Drift never feels like movement. It feels like stillness. But it carries you just the same. You wake up one day and don't recognize your life, your job, your body, your mindset. Not because of some catastrophic fall, but because of 1,000 small defaults, stacked one on top of another, until you've built a life you never intended. And change, it requires friction. It demands energy. It costs comfort. But the alternative is to become a passive passenger in your own existence. So what's the way out? Start small. Change one setting. Uncheck one box. Say no to one default. Ask, what am I accepting simply because it was already there? Because real choice begins not with what you do, but with what you notice. And when you start noticing the defaults, you begin to see the invisible architecture of your life, the scaffolding of suggestion, the whispered path of least resistance. And maybe that's what freedom really is. Not the absence of limits, but the refusal to drift, to wake up, to choose, even when it's harder, even when it's slower, even when it's unfamiliar. Because comfort can be a cage, and default is often its lock. So shake the settings, disturb the menu, rattle the routine, because the life you want might just be waiting on the other side of the box you never thought to uncheck. The wall of optimism. You set a goal. It burns bright. You picture the end, how it will feel, who will notice, what it will change. You feel ready, charged, unstoppable. But what you don't see, what most never see, is the terrain between here and there. The sleepless nights, the rejections, the slow, grinding plateaus. You're not lying to yourself. You're just optimistic. And that optimism builds something powerful and dangerous, the wall of optimism. This wall isn't made of bricks. It's made of belief, of vision boards, of mantras and motivational speeches, of smiling advice from people who made it, never mentioning how many didn't. It's reinforced by stories of overnight success, of underdogs who beat the odds, of dreams that defied gravity. It feels noble, courageous, but beneath the surface, it blinds you. Because optimism isn't always light. Sometimes it's a blinding sun. And when you stare into it too long, you stop seeing the cracks in your plan. You overlook the red flags. You underestimate the cost. You tell yourself, it'll work out, even when the data says otherwise. You push forward, full speed, because to hesitate feels like betrayal, like doubt, like failure. Psychologists call it the optimism bias. The tendency to believe you're less likely to experience failure than others, that you'll be the exception, that the rules won't apply to you. And this belief doesn't just color your plans, it rewrites them. You start a business thinking it'll break even in a year. It takes 3. You write a book expecting praise. It gets ignored. You plan a perfect trip, and it rains every day. The problem isn't the goal. The problem is how optimism masks the real weight of the journey. And yet, you needed it. Because if you'd known, truly known, what it would cost, maybe you wouldn't have started. That's the paradox. The wall that hides reality also gives you the courage to begin. Hope is a double-edged sword. It's what makes you leap. It's what makes you try again. But it can also keep you stuck. In bad ideas. In bad investments. In toxic relationships. You keep saying, it'll get better. But it doesn't. You stay because you believe in the potential, not the pattern. You ignore the data and cling to the dream. Not because you're delusional, but because you're human. We're wired this way. Evolution favored those who believed they could win, because that belief made them try. And sometimes trying was enough. But in today's world, that same wiring can mislead. It tells you to bet on yourself without checking the odds. To start without a plan B. To leap without checking how far the fall is. And when things collapse, when the wall finally cracks, it's not just disappointment. It's identity crisis. Because you didn't just hope for success, you expected it. And when it doesn't arrive, the failure feels personal. Not just a setback, but a verdict. You think, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I never was. But it wasn't you. It was the wall. The one you built with every motivational quote that skipped over the struggle. This is why so many people burn out. Not from hard work, but from unmet expectations. From crashing into obstacles they thought they'd bypass. They weren't weak. They were unprepared. And it's not just about careers. Think about love. You meet someone. Sparks fly. You imagine a future. You idealize. You project. And when they reveal who they truly are, flawed, human, messy, you feel betrayed. Not because they lied, but because your optimism did. The wall of optimism doesn't just block out hardship, it blocks out reality. It edits the future into something smoother than it could ever be. And when reality doesn't match the script, you feel lost. So what's the alternative? Become a pessimist? No, not at all. Because pessimism paralyzes. But realism equips. Realism says, this will be hard, and I will prepare. It says, I believe I can succeed, but I also know success won't come easy. It says, I can hope, but I will also plan. Realism builds bridges where optimism builds walls. It teaches you to run toward the storm with a raincoat, to love with boundaries, to start the business with backup savings, to dream big, but train even bigger. Because it's not hope that makes you powerful. It's preparation. So before you begin, ask, what am I not seeing? What pain am I underestimating? What resistance am I romanticizing away? If you dare to ask these questions, your hope won't shrink, it will evolve. From naive faith into strategic fire. From blindfold into beacon. Hope is not the enemy. But when left unchecked, it builds walls so tall you no longer see the truth behind them. And truth matters. Because it's the only ground you can actually build on. So take your hope. Keep it. But surround it with clarity. With courage. With contingency. Tear down the wall, brick by brick. And then walk forward. Not in denial, not in delusion, but in full, grounded defiance of every real obstacle ahead. Not because you think it'll be easy, but because now you're truly ready. The frequency illusion. You hear a strange word, maybe in a podcast, maybe in a passing conversation, maybe buried inside a sentence you almost didn't notice. Liminal. You pause for a second. It stands out. You've never really heard it before. It lingers in your mind for just a moment, then dissolves back into the noise of your day. But something strange happens next. The next morning, you scroll through your feed, and there it is, liminal spaces. Later, a YouTube title, The Liminal Mind. Then someone at work uses it in casual conversation. A day later, it's in a book you're reading. A week later, it shows up in a song lyric. Suddenly, it's everywhere. Was the word always this common? Was the world whispering it all along while you remained deaf to its call? No, it's not the world that changed. It's your perception. This is the frequency illusion, sometimes called the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon, a psychological glitch that tricks you into thinking something is appearing more often simply because you noticed it once. But the thing itself isn't suddenly more common. Your brain is simply tuning into it with a new kind of vigilance. It's not magic. It's attention. And attention, once awakened, changes everything. Your mind is constantly filtering information, millions of sounds, colors, patterns, symbols, faces. If it didn't filter, you drown. So your brain learns to prioritize. It builds a map of what matters and what doesn't. The moment something enters your conscious awareness, whether it's a word, an idea, a product, or a person, it earns a spot on that map. And once it's on the map, your brain starts spotting it everywhere. It feels like the world is echoing your thoughts. But really, your thoughts have just colored the lens you're looking through. Think of it like this. You buy a red car. It's the first red car you've ever owned. The next day, you start seeing red cars on every street, in every parking lot, at every intersection. Did the number of red cars suddenly multiply? No, they were always there. But now, your brain has placed red car higher in the hierarchy of attention. So what used to be background noise becomes a signal. The same thing happens when you're pregnant, and suddenly you see babies everywhere. Or when you're heartbroken, and every song seems to speak directly to your pain. Or when you learn about a rare illness, and suddenly 3 people mention it within a week. It feels like synchronicity. It feels like the universe is winking at you. But it's not. It's your brain, trying to make meaning in a chaotic world. And meaning-making is your brain's favorite game. This illusion isn't just a quirky trick of perception. It has consequences. It can shape your beliefs. It can deepen your biases. It can manipulate your memory. Because once you notice something, you begin to believe it's more common than it is. And that belief shapes your reality. If you read one alarming news story, and then suddenly notice 5 more just like it, you may think the world is spiraling into chaos, when really, your brain is just spotlighting fear. If you hear about a conspiracy theory once, and then see it echoed in a few more corners of the internet, you may begin to think it's everywhere. But it's not. It's your pattern recognition on overdrive. This is how echo chambers form, how superstitions begin, how paranoia takes root. It all starts with a flicker of attention and ends with a rewritten perception of the world. And yet, there's beauty in this illusion too. Because the same phenomenon that amplifies fear can also amplify curiosity, wonder, discovery. The moment you learn about something beautiful, a scientific concept, a cultural ritual, a word that opens your worldview, Your mind begins to light it up wherever it finds it. Not because it's appearing more, but because you're finally seeing it. The world hasn't changed. You have. So the question isn't, why is this everywhere now? The question is, why didn't I notice it before? And what else is out there, hidden in plain sight, just waiting for your attention to shift? You see, the frequency illusion is not just a distortion. It's a clue. It reveals the power of focus. It reminds you that reality is not something you observe passively. It's something your brain is constantly sculpting. Every time you learn something new, you reshape what the world looks like. Every piece of awareness acts like a magnet, pulling similar information toward it. Not in the physical world, but in the cognitive one. Your reality is, in many ways, a mirror of what you choose to notice. And the moment you understand that, you gain some control. Because now, you can choose to redirect the spotlight. You can feed your attention with what you want to grow. And maybe, just maybe, you'll realize that the world wasn't suddenly full of signs. It was always full. You just weren't looking. But now you are. The halo projection bias. They walk into the room with confidence. Their handshake is firm. Their smile is warm. They're well-dressed, well-spoken, maybe even charming. And before they've said more than a sentence, your mind has already decided, this is a good person. You don't know their past. You don't know their choices. You don't know how they treat others when no one is watching. But you feel it. You trust it. You believe in them. This is the halo projection bias, a powerful, invisible shortcut your brain takes every day. It's the tendency to take one positive trait and let it spill over, to let it color the rest, to turn likability into morality, attractiveness into trustworthiness, competence into kindness. And just like that, a smile becomes a verdict. A charming tone becomes a moral compass. An impressive resume becomes a clean soul. You don't mean to do it. It's not a conscious lie. It's an emotional blur. Because the mind doesn't just perceive, it fills in gaps. And when you see something you like, you want the rest of the story to match. So you skip the wait. You write the ending. You say, if they're smart, they must be kind. If they're generous once, they must be selfless always. If they're successful, they must be wise. But none of that is guaranteed. A brilliant speaker can be a manipulator. A graceful host can be emotionally cruel. A good deed can be a performance. And the halo makes you miss it. You've seen this bias in action again and again. The celebrity who becomes a hero just for being famous. The politician who says the right words but hides a corrupt agenda. The boss who's charming in meetings but toxic behind closed doors. The teacher, the coach, the mentor, respected, admired, above suspicion, until the truth surfaces and everyone says the same thing. But they seemed so nice. Yes, that's the trap. We confuse the appearance of goodness with the reality of it. Because it's easier. Because it feels good. Because we want to believe people are exactly as they present themselves. And because we want to believe we're good judges of character. But the halo projection isn't just dangerous because it makes us trust the wrong people. It's dangerous because it makes us overlook harm. We excuse red flags. We dismiss accusations. We silence our doubts. Because nice people don't do bad things. Because smart people don't lie. Because we couldn't be fooled. But we can. And we are. This bias doesn't just shape how we see others. It shapes how we treat them. When someone falls under the glow of the halo, we give them the benefit of the doubt. We give them second chances. We forgive them quickly. We elevate them. Meanwhile, those outside the glow, the awkward, the plain, the anxious, the different, get the opposite. They're doubted, misunderstood, ignored. Not because they've done anything wrong, but because they don't look right. This is how injustice hides in plain sight. This is how inequality is reinforced, by charm, by beauty, by confidence. And what's worse, we don't even see it happening. Because the halo doesn't look like bias. It looks like admiration. It feels like trust. But real trust isn't based on surface traits. It's based on behavior over time. It's built, not assumed. Earned, not projected. And character, true character, doesn't always shine on a stage. It's found in the quiet choices. The integrity no one sees. The consistency in the shadows. So how do you break the halo? You start by slowing down. When you're impressed by someone, ask yourself, what do I really know about them? Am I trusting evidence or emotion? Am I filling in blanks with hope or with facts? And more importantly, Would I be this forgiving if they weren't attractive? Would I be this patient if they weren't charismatic? It's not easy. The halo is seductive. It flatters your instincts. It tells you, you're right. Your gut is flawless. But wisdom requires pause. It requires questioning even your first impressions, especially your first impressions. Because the truth is, nobody is all good, and nobody is all bad. People are messy, layered, complicated, and that includes the ones you admire most. So the next time you feel the halo forming, when someone seems too perfect, too polished, too likable, don't ignore the feeling. Just hold it lightly. Watch it. Because behind the glow, there is a real person. Not a projection, not an angel, just a human. And to see them clearly, you have to look past the shine. The narrative fallacy trap. You sit with a friend over coffee. They tell you how everything in their life changed because of one conversation, one moment, one decision. It all just clicked. And you nod, enchanted, because the story feels true. The cause, the effect, the meaning, it all fits together so perfectly. But here's what your brain won't tell you. That neat little story is a lie. Not on purpose, but by design. This is the narrative fallacy trap. It's your mind's relentless urge to weave life into a plot, to take the chaos of the past and reshape it into a smooth, clean arc. It wants heroes, villains, turning points, motives, lessons, a beginning, a middle, an end. Because randomness is terrifying. And the truth? It's often random. But randomness doesn't satisfy. It doesn't comfort. It doesn't resolve. So your brain does what it's always done. It writes a story, not to deceive you, but to protect you. You fail an exam and say, I knew I should have studied harder. But what if the questions just didn't match your strengths? You meet someone on a rainy Tuesday, fall in love, and later call it fate. But what if you just happened to be in the same place at the same time? You lose your job and say, this was meant to push me toward my true calling. But maybe it was just economics. Maybe it was unfair. Maybe there's no reason. Your mind doesn't care. It will assign one anyway. Because a meaningless event is harder to digest than a flawed story. You want the why, even when there isn't one. And the danger is this. Once a story forms, it sticks. Memory conforms to it. Evidence bends around it. Contradictions get filtered out. And what you're left with isn't what happened. It's the version of what happened that feels coherent. But coherence doesn't equal truth. Imagine a jury, listening to a lawyer spin a tale about the defendant's motives. Every fact is shaped to fit a storyline. The defendant is cold, calculated. The timeline lines up. The outcome makes sense. And you believe it, because it sounds right. But sounding right isn't being right. The same thing happens in your own mind. You look back at your life and cherry-pick the details that make your journey sound purposeful. You delete the boring parts. Smooth the contradictions. Rewrite the characters. You're not recalling the past. You're editing it. And the scariest part? You don't even know you're doing it. You look at a successful entrepreneur and say, they always had that spark. You look at a failed relationship and say, the signs were there from the beginning. You look at your current self and believe everything was leading to this. But that's not truth. That's reverse engineering. That's turning fog into architecture. Coincidence into prophecy. Why does your mind do this? Because stories feel safe, predictable, digestible. They give you the illusion of control. If everything happens for a reason, then you're not lost, you're guided. If life follows a script, then maybe the suffering has purpose. The chaos has meaning. The pain is just a setup for redemption. But what if it's not? What if there is no arc? No lesson? No narrative? Just fragments. Just noise. Just a swirling ocean of causes and effects, none of which care about your closure. Would you be okay with that? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. When you demand story, you lose nuance. You ignore randomness. You flatten people. You reduce events to cliches. You mistake what feels meaningful for what is meaningful. You say, everything happens for a reason. But sometimes, things just happen. You say, this was destiny. But maybe it was a series of small, unrelated moments. You say, I always knew. But hindsight is a liar. It stitches logic onto memory and calls it foresight. Think of how we idolized the origin story. The dropout who became a billionaire. The trauma survivor who became a healer. The childhood hobby that became a career. These stories inspire, but they also deceive. They imply a straight line where none existed. They ignore the noise, the chance, the luck, the privilege, the alternative paths that could have happened but didn't. And we do this not just to others, but to ourselves. You say, "This is who I am. This is how I've always been." But identity is not a plot line. It's a storm, a collection of roles, memories, adaptations, misremembered moments, and evolving desires. And yet, you crave the anchor, the continuity. So you narrate your life to yourself like a movie, even when it doesn't fit. But real life isn't a movie. It's a mosaic. Messy, incomplete, sometimes beautiful, sometimes senseless. And that's okay. The danger comes when the need for story makes you blind to truth. You overlook the role of randomness. You ignore the variables you can't control. You demonize or idolize people instead of accepting their complexity. You stay stuck in false meaning because a clean story feels better than a hard reality. But the truth is, freedom lives outside the narrative. When you drop the need to make it all make sense, when you stop trying to wrap your life in a neat bow, you gain clarity. You see events for what they are, not what you need them to be. You stop being the unreliable narrator and start being the honest observer. So ask yourself, am I telling the story to understand or to soothe? Am I remembering it this way because it's true or because it feels clean? Because sometimes the most honest answer is, I don't know why it happened. And that's not weakness. That's wisdom. In a world obsessed with narrative, it takes courage to embrace the fragments, to sit in the mess, to say, this happened. It hurt. It changed me. But maybe it didn't happen for anything. Maybe it just happened. And maybe that's enough. The magical thinking reflex, you think about someone and they text you. You whisper a hope under your breath, and hours later, something good happens. You lose something, give up the search, and then it appears. And deep down, something stirs. A quiet thrill. A hidden voice that whispers, did I just cause that? This is the magical thinking reflex. A glitch in the mind where coincidence becomes connection, where thoughts, feelings, and dreams are mistaken for levers that move reality. It doesn't begin with belief. It begins with meaning. Your mind sees a pattern, and before logic can protest, imagination steps in, hands trembling, eyes wide, whispering, what if it wasn't random? You throw salt over your shoulder. Avoid walking under ladders. Make a wish when the clock says 11:11. You don't believe in magic, but you still do it. Just in case. Because magical thinking isn't about rationality. It's about comfort. It's about control. In a world too big, too fast, too chaotic, your brain tries to shrink it down. To give it rules. Rules you can control. If I wear this shirt, we'll win. If I don't say it out loud, it won't happen. If I think bad thoughts, something bad will follow. This isn't stupidity. It's self-protection. It's your brain trying to give shape to a world that often makes no sense. It's the child in you, still alive, still watching the clouds, still believing that a wish can bend the wind. And sometimes it works. Not because the universe is listening, but because your perception is. You focus harder. You expect more. You notice what matches your belief and ignore what doesn't. Your thoughts haven't changed the world. They've filtered it. This is where the reflex becomes a loop. You imagine something. It happens. You remember the connection. You forget the dozens of times it didn't work. And now, you believe. Not because it's true, but because it feels true. Confirmation bias kicks in. The illusion strengthens. And soon, you're building a belief system on a foundation of fog. You read a horoscope that says you'll have conflict today. Later, your coworker frowns, and your stomach twists. See, you think. It's already happening. But did the stars predict it? Or did the idea prime you to see it? Magical thinking sneaks into every corner. It lives in rituals. In sports, where athletes repeat the same routine before every game. In relationships, where we think saying, I love you, at the wrong moment might jinx the bond. In grief, where we beg the universe for a sign from someone gone, and see that sign in every feather, every flickering light, every dream. Because the heart doesn't care about logic. It cares about meaning. And when meaning feels absent, we invent it. That's not weakness. That's survival. In childhood, magical thinking is normal. Developmental psychologists call it a stage, when kids believe their thoughts can cause events. I got mad at mommy. Then she got hurt. I did that. It's heartbreaking. And it's human. Most people outgrow it. But not entirely. Because trauma can bring it back. So can uncertainty. When life spins out of control, We reach for invisible strings. We pray harder. We knock on wood. We stop thinking certain thoughts because it feels safer not to. Not because we know it matters, but because imagining the alternative is too painful. And that's where magical thinking becomes dangerous. It can breed guilt. If only I'd thought differently, they wouldn't have died. It can create superstition that limits freedom. I can't go outside today. It's a bad omen. It can turn healing into obsession. If I visualize hard enough, I won't get sick. The mind begins to confuse control with responsibility. And responsibility becomes blame. You start believing your thoughts are reality. And when that illusion breaks, you break with it. But the truth is this. Your thoughts are powerful, but they are not magic. They shape your choices. They influence your focus. But they do not pull levers in the sky. You are not cursed because of a sentence you spoke in anger. You are not blessed just because you found a coin on the ground. And yet, there is beauty in the reflex. Because even if magical thinking isn't real, it reveals something that is. Hope, longing, imagination, the desire to connect, to matter, to shape the chaos around you. To feel like you're not just watching life, but participating in it. So don't be ashamed if you make a wish. If you keep a lucky charm. If you feel a strange chill when your dream plays out in waking life. But also, don't surrender your logic. Don't let imagination become your jailer. Use it as a lamp, not a leash. Because the world is already full of mystery. You don't have to invent more. And sometimes, the most magical thing you can do is accept that some things have no meaning, no pattern, no cause. And that's okay. Because not everything happens for you. But everything happens with you. You are a witness, a meaning maker, not a magician, not a god. So honor your wonder, but check your reflex. You are not cursed. You are not chosen. You are simply human. And that's magic enough. The cognitive dissonance ref, you think you believe in truth. That your mind is a loyal seeker of reality, unafraid of facts, no matter how uncomfortable. But the truth is, you don't believe what's true. You believe what makes you feel less broken. You believe what lets you sleep. You believe what allows your story to stay intact. And when that story is threatened, when a new fact tears through the narrative you've built, your brain doesn't invite the truth in. It flinches. It defends. It rewrites. This is the cognitive dissonance reflex. Cognitive dissonance is not a glitch. It's a reflex, a built-in mechanism that activates the moment two conflicting truths crash into each other. One says, "This is who I am." The other says, "Then why did I do that?" One says, "I'm a good person." The other says, "You hurt someone." One says, "I'm in control." The other says, "You're lying to yourself." The tension is unbearable. And so, the reflex kicks in, not to resolve it with accuracy, but to silence it with comfort. You justify. You edit. You bury. You grab a belief, any belief, that restores internal peace. That's what you're really after. Not truth. Coherence. You tell yourself your toxic relationship is still full of love, because the idea that you wasted years is too devastating to face. You double down on a political opinion even after it's been disproven, because admitting you were wrong feels like erasing part of your identity. You rationalize staying at a job that kills your spirit, because it fits the story you told everyone else. You twist the facts, not because you're dishonest, but because you're human. The discomfort of cognitive dissonance is a kind of psychic pain, a burn that demands immediate attention. And just like physical pain, your brain's first instinct is not to understand it. It's to make it stop, to numb it, to explain it away, to silence it with whatever narrative puts the fire out fastest. This is why people cling harder to false beliefs when presented with contradicting evidence. Not because they're stupid, but because they've anchored part of their self-worth to those beliefs. The facts don't just threaten an idea, they threaten them. The brain whispers, "If this belief falls, who are you?" And so, you protect the belief. You shield it from logic. You build defenses around it, not with proof, but with fear. This is how people become trapped in echo chambers. It's not just that opposing views are uncomfortable. It's that they fracture the mirror. They force you to look at your own reflection and ask, what else might I be wrong about? And most minds would rather go blind than see that clearly. Think of the smoker who knows cigarettes kill. They'll say, "I only smoke when I'm stressed." Or, "My grandfather smoked till 90. Or, "We all die anyway." Not because they believe these statements are accurate, but because they relieve the dissonance, because they let the mind settle, because they stitch the tear between knowledge and action. This reflex shows up in every corner of life. In relationships, you downplay abuse because the alternative is accepting that someone you love is dangerous. In religion, you ignore contradictions because questioning the divine would unravel your entire moral compass. In identity, you dismiss criticism because accepting it might mean reshaping who you think you are. And the most terrifying dissonance of all, when your past self believed something that your present self no longer does. Because that means you were once wrong. And that kind of reckoning doesn't just require admitting error, it requires grieving who you were. And not everyone is ready to bury that version of themselves. So what do we do? How do we escape the reflex? We don't kill it, but we can become aware of it. We can watch it. When you feel the burn, when your heart tightens, your mind resists, your voice sharpens, that's not just disagreement. That's dissonance. That's the signal. And in that moment, ask, am I defending truth or defending peace? Dissonance is uncomfortable, yes. But discomfort is not the enemy. Discomfort is data. It's the friction between the world as it is and the world as you wish it were. And within that tension lies growth. You don't evolve by avoiding that pain. You evolve by sitting in it, by asking harder questions, by holding the contradiction long enough to understand it, rather than escaping it. It takes courage, because the moment you allow truth to matter more than comfort, you begin to tear down the scaffolding of false belief. You begin to replace ego with humility, certainty with curiosity, narrative with nuance. And what you find on the other side, not just truth, but freedom. Because truth, even when it breaks you, also rebuilds you. Stronger, sharper, cleaner. So next time your mind tries to rewrite the facts to protect your peace, pause. Let the dissonance echo for a moment. Let it hurt. And then ask the question most never dare to ask. What if the thing I don't want to believe is the only thing I need to hear? That's where clarity begins. That's where peace becomes real, not a blindfold, but a mirror. The effect heuristic shortcut, you see a smiling face. You feel warmth, trust. You hear a voice dripping with confidence, and suddenly, their words feel true. You walk into a room that smells like fresh coffee, and somehow, everything seems just a little more welcoming. You don't know why. You don't question it. You just feel it. And that feeling becomes your judgment. That's the effect heuristic shortcut. A subtle, emotional fast lane your brain uses to make decisions without thinking, where feelings become facts and impressions become conclusions. In a world too fast for analysis, your mind cuts corners by turning emotion into evidence. If something feels good, it must be good. If something feels off, it must be wrong. Your brain slaps a verdict on it before logic even enters the room. This isn't foolishness. It's biology. Your emotional brain is older than your rational brain. It evolved to help you survive, not analyze. When our ancestors saw a snake, they didn't pause to calculate probabilities. They felt fear and jumped. When they tasted something sweet, they felt pleasure and ate more. Quick emotional responses kept them alive. But today, that same shortcut hijacks your thinking. You hear a political message wrapped in a stirring speech and patriotic music. It feels right. It must be right. You meet someone with a warm smile and charismatic tone. They feel honest. They must be honest. You see a product with sleek design, minimalist packaging, and suddenly, it feels like quality. So you trust it. You buy it. You believe. All without checking the facts. Because logic is slow. And emotion? It's instant. The effect heuristic works like a silent editor. It takes how you feel and fills in the blanks of what you think. And you don't notice it happening. That's what makes it so dangerous. It feels natural. It feels like instinct. But what you're really doing is substituting emotion for evidence. Think of a courtroom where the jury isn't allowed to see the evidence. Only the tone of the lawyer, the background music, the lighting in the room. That's what the effect heuristic does to your mind. It turns perception into a verdict. It short-circuits reason. And the scariest part? It happens before you're aware of it. Psychologist Paul Slovic found that people who felt good about nuclear energy rated its risks lower and its benefits higher. People who felt negatively about it, regardless of facts, did the opposite. The feeling came first. The logic came later, twisted to support the emotion already in place. Emotion doesn't follow your beliefs. Beliefs follow your emotion. Imagine watching a commercial with uplifting music slow motion shots of happy families, sunsets, laughter. The product? It could be anything, but you already feel warm, safe. So your mind decides the product must be good. You're not judging the product. You're judging your own mood. Or picture this. You've had a rough day. Your mood is low. Then someone makes a small mistake. Maybe they forget to respond to a text. Suddenly, it feels like they're ignoring you, disrespecting you. But are they? Or is your brain projecting the emotion it's already carrying? This is how misunderstandings are born, how arguments ignite, how biases root themselves deep. The effect heuristic doesn't just shape your consumer choices or snap judgments. It warps your entire worldview. If your dominant emotional state is fear, the world looks threatening. If it's love, the world looks kind. If it's anger, everyone seems like a rival. The external world reflects the internal temperature of your emotional weather. And it doesn't stop there. Marketers know this. Politicians know this. Manipulators thrive on it. They don't argue facts. They craft feelings. They use music, color, tone, pacing, lighting, background imagery. Everything calibrated to stir your emotion before your mind can catch up. Because they know, once you feel something, your logic will scramble to justify it. And it works. You don't vote for policy. You vote for the feeling a candidate gives you. You don't buy safety. You buy the feeling of being secure. You don't follow truth. You follow what feels true. That's the hidden cost of the effect heuristic. It makes your emotional reaction seem like insight, like instinct, like truth. But it's not. It's a shortcut, a substitution, a painted mask. So how do you fight it? You slow down. You ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? And is that feeling shaping how I see this person, this choice, this moment? You learn to notice the gap between the impression and the reality. You recognize when your mind is dressing up emotion in the costume of fact. And you ask the hard question, do I believe this because it's true, or because it just feels good to believe it? That's where clarity begins. Because feelings matter. They are signals, but they are not proof. Sometimes they point to truth. Other times, they lead you off a cliff. And your job, if you want to live a life guided by insight rather than illusion, is to know the difference. To feel, and then think. To let emotions speak, but not let it be the judge. Because the truth, reality doesn't care how you feel. But wisdom does. And wisdom begins the moment you question the shortcut. Even if it leads you through discomfort, doubt, or the loss of a comforting lie. That's the price of seeing clearly. That's the cost of choosing truth over ease. And it's worth it. Every time. The attribution tangle. Someone doesn't text you back. You stare at the screen, that hollow pause growing louder with every passing minute. They must be ignoring you. They must be mad. They must not care. But maybe their phone died. Or they fell asleep. Or they're going through something they haven't told you about. You don't know. But your mind doesn't wait. It fills the gap with meaning, fast, and almost always wrong. This is the attribution tangle. The quiet, relentless mental habit of explaining human behavior by assigning causes. Causes that feel true, but often aren't. You don't see what happened. You see what you think happened. And even more dangerously, why? You assume motive when it could be coincidence. You assume strategy when it might be impulse. You assume betrayal when it was just confusion. You assume everything means something, especially when it hurts. Because the brain hates uncertainty. It craves explanation. It would rather have a bad reason than no reason at all. And so, it spins stories. They didn't invite you because they don't like you. She's quiet today because she's judging you. He made that comment because he wanted to undermine you. They laughed because it was about you. The truth? Maybe they were busy. Maybe she's having a rough day. Maybe he didn't mean anything by it. Maybe the laughter wasn't even about you. But you don't ask. You assume. And you start reacting to your own interpretation, not to reality. That's the tangle. The moment you believe your version of someone's motive is the truth, you stop seeing them as they are and start seeing a version of them that you've invented. And once you've done that, once you're tangled in a web of assumptions, everything they do becomes more evidence for the story you've already decided is real. They text late. Confirmation. They seem distracted. Proof. They change plans. Of course they did. You're not watching their actions anymore. You're watching a movie your brain wrote and cast them in, without their permission. It happens everywhere. At work, your boss gives someone else the project, and you assume favoritism. A coworker doesn't say hi in the hallway, and you assume they're cold. In relationships, A partner is distant, and you assume falling out of love. They forget a small detail, and you assume they don't care. They sigh, and you assume it's about you. Even with strangers. The driver who cuts you off is an idiot. The barista who doesn't smile is rude. The neighbor who keeps to themselves is unfriendly. But what if none of that is true? What if the driver was racing to the hospital? What if the barista just lost someone they love? What if the neighbor is shy, not hostile? You'll never know, unless you ask. But the attribution tangle makes sure you don't. Because once you've written the story, asking feels unnecessary. And sometimes even threatening. Because if your assumption is wrong, you have to admit you built a judgment on sand. And ego hates that. So the tangle grows tighter. This isn't about being gullible. It's about being honest with yourself. About how often your conclusions are really just educated guesses, painted with emotion, shaped by insecurity, colored by past wounds. Because you're not just reacting to the moment. You're reacting to every other moment that felt like this. The old betrayals, the ancient rejections, the past patterns that whisper, it's happening again. And maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. The point is, you don't know yet. And that gap between what happened and why it happened, that's the space where empathy lives, where curiosity survives, where relationships are saved instead of ruined. So how do you untangle the knot? You start by catching the moment when your brain fills in the blank. When it whispers motive where there's only action. When it paints intention where there's only a gesture. You pause. You ask, what else could be true? Is this about them? Or is this about how I feel right now? Do I know, or am I guessing? You slow down the reflex. You start separating what you saw from what you believed about it. You make room for grace. Because when you allow the possibility of misunderstanding, you allow the possibility of repair. Not every silence is rejection. Not every offense is personal. Not every mistake is malicious. Sometimes people are clumsy. Sometimes they forget. Sometimes they're overwhelmed. Sometimes they simply didn't see the world the way you do. And that's okay. The attribution tangle wants you to be certain. But certainty often costs connection. And if you can let go of needing to be right about someone's motives, you just might give them the space to show you who they really are. Not the version your mind invented, but the real one. Imperfect, complex, human, just like you. The false consensus mirror. You scroll through your feed and nod. Post after post, opinion after opinion. Each one echoing what you already believe. Your friends agree. Your followers applaud. The comments validate. And slowly, a quiet certainty begins to take hold. Everyone thinks like this. Everyone sees it this way. This is common sense. But what you're feeling isn't truth. It's reflection. It's not the world looking back at you. It's your own mind, mirrored and magnified by those you've chosen to surround yourself with. This is the false consensus mirror. It's the illusion that your thoughts are the norm, that your beliefs are the default, that your values are the baseline for reasonable. But what you're actually seeing isn't consensus. It's curation, a carefully crafted ecosystem of agreement that makes your worldview feel universal, even when it's not. Your brain doesn't want isolation. It wants belonging. And belonging often comes from similarity. So you unconsciously, quietly, and sometimes deliberately gravitate toward people who think like you. You follow accounts that affirm you. Join groups that nod along. Read articles that confirm your bias. And bit by bit, your world becomes homogeneous. Not because the world is, but because you made it that way. And once you're inside that bubble, everything outside of it begins to look strange. Extreme. Misguided. Dangerous. Because difference feels like distortion when you've lived too long in a hall of mirrors. You think your opinion is mainstream. That your reaction is justified. That your moral stance is shared by most people. But most people is an illusion. Because you haven't seen most people. You've only seen your people. It's not just online. It happens in real life, too. At dinner tables. In office break rooms. In neighborhoods where everyone votes the same. Worships the same. Shops the same. Watches the same news. And you begin to believe that the silence of disagreement is proof of consensus. That the absence of challenge means the presence of truth. But silence can be fear. Disagreement can be hidden. And your comfort zone can be a blindfold. The danger of the false consensus mirror isn't just personal, it's social. It's how polarization deepens, how empathy dies, how entire populations forget that there are other realities being lived. You see a protest and think, they're crazy. You hear a vote count and think, How could anyone think that way? You read a comment and think, this has to be a troll. No real person could believe this. But they do. They are. They exist. And they think the same about you. Because they have their mirror too. Their circle. Their feed. Their curated reality that reflects back their truth with the same intensity. And from inside it, you look like the delusion. Now multiply that by millions. Imagine two sides, each staring into their own mirror, convinced they're seeing the world, and both believing the other side is blind. This is how division calcifies, not through hate, but through insulation, through the slow, invisible drift from "this is what I believe" to "this is what everyone believes." And once that shift locks in, disagreement doesn't feel like debate. It feels like deviance. But the truth is harder. It's that your view, however moral, logical, or popular it feels, is still just a view. One among many. A fragment, not a whole. You say, I don't know anyone who thinks that. But maybe that's the problem. You say, no one reasonable could believe this. But maybe reason looks different from another life. You say, the world agrees. But maybe you've only seen one window. So how do you shatter the mirror? You expose yourself to friction, to ideas that unsettle, to voices that don't comfort you. You listen, not to agree, but to understand. You make space for the discomfort of complexity. You remember that common sense is often just common to you. You realize that just because your circle claps doesn't mean the world does. And once you see the mirror for what it is, not a window, not a lens, but a loop, you begin to break free. You start noticing the blind spots, the silences, the things your circle doesn't talk about, the truths that don't trend, the people who don't appear in your curated reality, but exist nonetheless. This doesn't mean surrender your beliefs. It means loosen your grip. Hold conviction with humility. Trade certainty for curiosity. Ask, what am I not seeing because everyone around me agrees? Because consensus is not always truth. Sometimes it's just reflection. And mirrors, as clear as they seem, only ever show you. The defensive attribution loop. You hear a terrible story. A woman walking home at night, attacked. A man loses everything in a car accident, paralyzed. A family wiped out by a random tragedy. And almost immediately, a thought slips into your mind. Why was she out so late? Was he texting while driving? Did they ignore the warning signs? It feels like curiosity. It feels like logic. But it's not. It's fear, disguised as fairness. This is the defensive attribution loop. A psychological shield we build to protect ourselves from the unbearable idea that sometimes bad things just happen. For no reason. To anyone. Including us. So instead, we tell stories. We rewrite reality. We frame victims as somehow responsible. Not because we're cruel, but because we're afraid. Because if their pain was random, then we are vulnerable. If their suffering had no cause, then no precaution is enough. And that is too terrifying to live with. So we blame. Not to hurt them, but to protect ourselves. If she hadn't worn that dress, if he hadn't taken that road, if they had only listened. We create a narrative where the world is orderly, where cause always leads to effect, where every tragedy has a moral flaw attached, not because it's true, but because it keeps us sane. This is the lie of a just world. The belief that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to those who deserve it. It sounds comforting, but it's a dangerous illusion, because it means that when tragedy strikes the innocent, we don't grieve. We scrutinize. We dissect their choices, their behavior, their past, until we find something that explains it, not to understand them, but to distance ourselves from them. If I don't make that mistake, I'll be safe. If I don't live that way, it won't happen to me. If I follow the rules will protect me. But what if they won't? What if the world is not fair? What if the dice are sometimes loaded? What if someone can do everything right and still fall? That's where the loop begins. Because the more we fear randomness, the more we blame those who suffer from it. And the more we blame, the more we reinforce the illusion of control. Until one day we suffer. And then we turn inward. We ask, what did I do to deserve this? Where did I go wrong? What could I have done differently? Because the loop doesn't just target others. Eventually, it consumes you. You become your own victim, judged by your own impossible standards, punished by the same logic you once used to protect yourself. And now, in your pain, you realize the truth. There is no fairness contract. There is no cosmic scorekeeper. There is only life, messy, unpredictable, and unfair. But if you can sit with that truth, if you can hold its weight without flinching, then something powerful happens. You begin to see victims not as cautionary tales, but as human beings. You stop asking, what did they do wrong? And start asking, what did they survive? What did they lose? What can I do for them? Empathy replaces distance. Compassion replaces blame. And you stop needing to believe in a just world, because you've started creating a kinder one. Not with control, but with courage. Because courage is not believing that nothing bad will happen. Courage is knowing it might, and still choosing to care, still choosing to help, still choosing to love, even when it's terrifying, even when the world doesn't reward you for it. So next time you feel that reflex, to judge, to question, to blame the hurting for their hurt, pause. Ask yourself, is this justice I'm seeking, or safety? Because the defensive attribution loop is not about truth. It's about fear. And to escape it, you don't need more answers. You need more humanity. You need to say, yes, this is unfair. Yes, it could happen to me. Yes, I'm afraid. But also, yes, I choose to care anyway. Yes, I choose to stand beside them. Yes, I choose love over certainty. Because the world may not be fair, but you can be. The belief perseverance lock, you're handed evidence, clear, undeniable, objective. The numbers are there. The facts align. The contradiction is obvious. And yet, something inside you tightens. Not in agreement. In resistance. You flinch, you argue, you dig in. Because logic might knock, but belief has already bolted the door. This is the belief perseverance lock, a mental deadbolt that guards falsehood with the full force of identity. It's not about being stupid. It's not about being uninformed. It's about being human. Once a belief is rooted, especially one that shapes how you see yourself or your world, it doesn't sit gently in the mind. It burrows. It integrates. It builds walls around itself, brick by brick. And once it becomes part of your identity, questioning it feels like tearing out a piece of yourself. Belief is sticky. You grow up hearing something over and over about your worth, your country, your gender, your God, your tribe, your enemies. These messages repeat like lullabies. And over time, they become so familiar, so constant, that your brain stops asking if they're true. It just accepts. And from that point on, any threat to the belief is treated like an attack on your safety. This is why people cling harder to their beliefs after they've been disproven. Show someone evidence that their favorite politician lied, and they'll say the media is biased. Show someone data that challenges their worldview, and they'll say the system is rigged. The stronger the evidence, the more creative the defense. Because the brain isn't analyzing. It's protecting. It's called motivated reasoning. Your mind doesn't look for what's true. It looks for what keeps its internal story intact. And if it must twist facts, ignore data, dismiss sources, or villainize truth itself, it will. Because in that moment, accuracy isn't the priority. Consistency is. And the cost of being wrong isn't just being wrong. It's losing the version of yourself built around being right. Imagine a person who's always believed they're self-made. They tell themselves they built everything from scratch, that they earned every victory through grit alone. Now, imagine presenting them with data about generational wealth, systemic privilege, and invisible support systems. That information might be true, but it threatens their narrative. And so, the mind rejects it, not because it isn't factual, but because it hurts. Beliefs aren't held in the intellect. They're held in the ego. And ego defends itself like a wounded animal. You see this in arguments every day, not discussions, not exchanges, but wars of identity. One person offers facts. The other offers fury. Because for them, being wrong isn't just about truth. It's about who they are if that truth is accepted. And the fear of becoming someone else, someone uncertain, someone flawed, that fear is stronger than most evidence ever could be. Even in science, belief perseverance shows its face. Researchers cling to outdated theories long after they've been debunked. Not because they don't understand the data, but because their careers, reputations, and self-worth were built around being right. To admit the error would require a kind of ego death, and few are willing to undergo it. This lock holds tight in religion, in politics, in parenting, in love. A parent may cling to the belief they were always fair, even when shown memories and moments where they weren't. Because admitting otherwise would mean facing guilt, shame, regret. A lover may believe their partner is good, despite lies, betrayal, and harm, because the belief has been woven into their sense of safety. A voter may believe their leader is noble, even as the truth crumbles beneath them, because the leader represents more than policy. They represent belonging. So how do you escape the lock? You don't pick it with facts alone. Facts are important, but they're not enough. You must approach belief through identity, through compassion, through curiosity. Ask, why does this belief matter to me? What would I lose if I let it go? Who would I become if I changed my mind? The answers are often emotional, raw, vulnerable, because beliefs don't just describe the world, they stabilize it. And changing one can feel like pulling the floor out from under your feet. But here's the secret. Growth feels like breaking before it feels like healing. To let go of a false belief is to admit that a past version of yourself was misled. That's hard. That takes courage. But it's also the most honest thing a person can do. And the most powerful. Because when you unlock the belief, you unlock yourself. You become teachable, flexible, real. You begin to trust truth, not just when it's flattering, but especially when it isn't. You learn to separate who you are from what you once believed. And that is freedom. So the next time someone shows you a truth that makes your stomach turn, your chest tighten, your mind race, pause. Not to argue, but to ask, is this a threat or an opportunity? Because the lock only holds as long as you let fear hold the key. And the moment you choose curiosity over comfort, the truth gets in. The status quo fallacy. You wake up, brush your teeth, drink your coffee, go to work, follow the rules, nod at the structure, and rarely pause to ask, why is it this way? Because it just is. The way schools operate, the way relationships are defined, the way success is measured, the way countries are run, all of it, so woven into the fabric of your life, you don't even notice the stitching. That's the status quo fallacy. The silent bias that convinces you the current way is the right way, simply because it's the existing way. You don't test the system. You inherit it. You don't question the hierarchy. You climb it. You don't examine the rules. You obey them. Because challenging what is feels unnatural, disrespectful, even dangerous. But truth doesn't care about comfort. And tradition doesn't guarantee wisdom. This fallacy doesn't scream. It whispers. It shows up in tiny thoughts you don't realize you're thinking. That's just how it's always been. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why change what works? But ask yourself, works for whom? The school system was designed over a century ago, not to inspire creativity, but to produce obedient workers for industrial factories. Rows of desks, bells that mimic shift changes, memorization over exploration. But we still follow that blueprint. Not because it's ideal, but because it's familiar. Or consider the 9-to-5 workday. Born in an era of manual labor and limited technology, it made sense then. But now, in a digital world with endless connectivity, is it still the most productive rhythm, or just the most accepted one? The status quo fallacy tricks you into believing age equals authority. That older means better. That if an idea has lasted this long, it must be wise. But time isn't a filter for truth. It's a sediment for power. Just because something has endured doesn't mean it's ethical, efficient, or true. Take marriage, for example. For centuries, it was a property contract, not a romantic union. Women were traded. Dowries exchanged. Love wasn't even part of the equation. Yet today, we cling to its rituals without always understanding their origins. White dresses, diamond rings, monogamy as moral default. Is it love, or is it legacy? Or look at how we define intelligence. We revere IQ tests, degrees, titles, tools of measurement forged in rigid systems. But what about emotional depth, empathy, creative insight? Why are those less valued? Because the system wasn't built to measure them. And so, we call them soft skills, as if softness means less. Governments, religions, economies, even the foods we eat, all shaped by long dead hands. And yet we live by their design, often without question. It's not that all tradition is bad. It's that most of it is unexamined. The status quo fallacy is comfortable. That's why it survives. It tells you, don't rock the boat. Don't ask too many questions. Don't be ungrateful. But gratitude and curiosity are not enemies. You can appreciate what came before and still wonder what could be better. And here's the sinister part. Systems built on the status quo protect themselves. They reward those who conform. They punish those who dissent. They gaslight the questioners. If you challenge the norm, you're called naive, or radical, or ungrateful. But the real danger isn't in asking questions. The real danger is never asking them at all. You see this in culture, in gender roles, in racial hierarchies, in economic myths. You're told, this is the way things are. But what they really mean is, this is the way things have always benefited us. And once you see it, really see it, it's hard to unsee. You realize that laws are not moral absolutes, that norms are not nature, that systems are not sacred. They're just decisions made by people, often imperfect ones. And what people create, people can change. But to do that, you must learn to pause when something just feels normal. You must trace it to its root and ask, where did this come from? Who built it? Who benefits from it? Who doesn't? And is it still serving the world we live in today? Or just the ghosts of yesterday? That's not rebellion. That's awakening. Because the price of untested tradition is progress postponed, lives constrained, potential wasted. And when you defend a broken system just because it's familiar, you become its servant, not its citizen. So challenge the curriculum. Question the clock. Redefine the roles. Break the rhythms. Tradition is not truth. It is memory. And memory can be beautiful, but it can also be blinding. You owe the past your awareness, not your obedience. You owe the future your courage, not your silence. And you owe yourself the freedom to ask, what if the way it's always been isn't the way it has to be? Because the world doesn't change when systems say it's time. It changes when you do. The intelligence illusion. You read an article. You watch a video. You hear a podcast or catch a thread online that explains something quickly, clearly, neatly. And suddenly, you feel like you understand. Not just the headline, but the whole truth. You start talking about it. You feel sharp, informed. You might even correct others. Because now you know. But do you? Or are you trapped in the intelligence illusion? It happens quietly. This seduction of partial knowledge. A few facts, a summary, a surface understanding, and your brain lights up. It rewards you with confidence. It says, you've got this. You've figured it out. But what it doesn't say is this. You've just started. You're at the very edge of the map, mistaking the legend for the entire territory. This is the paradox. The less you know, the easier it is to feel certain. Because complexity hasn't entered the room yet. Nuance hasn't knocked. And humility hasn't had its say. You're confident not because you know much, but because you don't yet know what you don't know. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. The cognitive bias where people with limited knowledge overestimate their competence. They believe they understand more than they do, while those who are deeply informed often underestimate themselves, precisely because they've seen how vast the subject really is. You felt this, haven't you? You dive into a new topic, nutrition, psychology, AI, geopolitics, and at first, it's thrilling. Everything makes sense. Everything is clear. But then, if you keep going, you start to see cracks. Exceptions. Contradictions. Layers beneath layers. And the more you read, the more uncertain you become. You begin to realize how much context matters. How incomplete most answers are. How every claim needs a dozen footnotes just to survive scrutiny. That's not confusion. That's growth. But most people don't get there. They stop at the first aha. They freeze curiosity in place. Because knowing a little feels so good. So clean. So empowering. And that's the trap. Confidence replaces curiosity. Opinion replaces inquiry. Performance replaces humility. And suddenly, someone who read one article speaks louder than someone who's studied for years. You see it in debates, on social media, in politics, in boardrooms, in classrooms. Those who shout the loudest often know the least. And those who hesitate, who use words like maybe, it depends, or I'm not sure, are often dismissed as weak. But real intelligence isn't loud. It's not cocky. It doesn't pretend to know everything. Real intelligence says, that's complicated. Let me think. I don't know yet. It takes strength to say, I don't know. It takes more intelligence to ask a good question than to give a quick answer. But we've built a culture that rewards the appearance of certainty. We celebrate confidence, even when it's hollow. We follow those who speak in absolutes, even when they're wrong. And we ignore the quiet, the cautious, the curious, because their wisdom doesn't perform well on a stage. This illusion doesn't just harm public discourse. It harms you. Because once you believe you've figured something out, you stop looking deeper. You stop learning. You defend your opinion instead of refining it. You build a mental fortress to protect your premature conclusions. And soon, you're not growing. You're just defending. So how do you escape? By asking harder questions. By getting comfortable with complexity. By recognizing that knowledge is not a destination, but a direction. You don't arrive. You explore. And if you keep going, your questions will become sharper, your thinking more flexible, your understanding more layered. But your confidence? It might drop. And that's okay. That drop isn't failure. It's awareness. It means you're starting to see the terrain for what it is. Messy, dynamic, uncertain. And that's where real intelligence begins. Not in having all the answers, but in knowing how fragile answers are. How important it is to stay open, to stay hungry, to stay a student. So the next time you feel that rush, that satisfying click of understanding, pause. Ask yourself, is this the beginning of knowing or the end of my curiosity? Am I confident because I understand or because I've stopped exploring? Am I building knowledge or just collecting shortcuts? Because the intelligence illusion is seductive. It flatters your ego. It hands you a mask of certainty. But behind it, you stop growing. And the truth is, you're smarter when you doubt, wiser when you wonder, and most powerful when you remember that learning never ends. Not when you speak, not when you teach, not even when you think you finally know. It ends when you believe the illusion and begin mistaking your flashlight for the sun. The mask of rationalization. You think you're being logical. You think you're weighing the facts, comparing the outcomes, listening to reason. But what if reason isn't leading you at all? What if it's following, obediently, quietly, craftily, making your decisions look wise only after you've already made them? This is the mask of rationalization. The illusion that logic is your compass, when in truth, it's your cover. You feel first. You choose. You desire. And then, only then, your mind builds a case around that choice, brick by brick, until it seems airtight. As if logic brought you here. As if this was inevitable. But your brain is not a judge weighing arguments. It's a lawyer defending a client. And the client is always your impulse. You say, I didn't buy the expensive car because I wanted to show off. I needed something reliable. You say, I broke up with them because I deserved better. You say, I quit the job because it wasn't aligned with my purpose. Maybe those things are true, but maybe they're not. Maybe they're the story you stitched over a gut feeling, a moment of discomfort, an emotional itch. And now, with enough repetition, that story feels real. Because rationalization doesn't just justify your actions, it rewrites your motives. You yell in anger, and afterward, you say, they needed to hear the truth. You cheat on a diet and say, I've had a tough week. I earned this. You avoid a risk and say, it wasn't the right time. But deep down, it's not logic that made the call. It's emotion, fear, insecurity, pride. And once the decision is made, reason races to dress it up, to clean the crime scene, to turn impulse into insight. And the scariest part? You believe it. Completely. You think, of course I chose this because it made the most sense. But logic doesn't arrive first. It just speaks last. This isn't weakness. It's wiring. The human brain evolved not to discover truth, but to survive, to persuade, to protect. So when a decision threatens your self-image, your ego, your tribe, your comfort, your mind bends the facts to fit the feeling. And it doesn't feel like deception. It feels like reason. That's why it's a mask. A perfect one. You see it everywhere. In politics, a voter supports a candidate based on identity or emotion, but rationalizes it with policy talk. In relationships, someone falls in love with the wrong person, but justifies it with cosmic talk of connection. In business, a risky choice is made on instinct, then defended with metrics that were never part of the original decision. And once the story is written, every detail is retrofitted to support it. Confirmation bias kicks in. Doubt is silenced. Contradictions are edited out. You say, I always knew this was right. But that's memory folding in on itself. That's hindsight painting over uncertainty. Rationalization doesn't just protect your past, it guides your future. You start mistaking what feels justified for what is justified. And so the same patterns repeat. The same impulses win. The same excuses echo until they feel like principles. But what if you paused before justifying? What if you asked, am I explaining this or excusing it? What if, for once, you let yourself sit with the discomfort of not knowing why you really did something? What if you admitted that sometimes you act out of fear, or pride, or loneliness? What if you looked behind the mask and didn't flinch? Because truth doesn't live in the first explanation. It lives in the second silence. The moment after the performance, after the alibi, when you ask, what did I need in that moment? And was this choice really about that? That kind of honesty doesn't come easy. It's not flattering. It won't win applause, but it will set you free. Free from the need to always be right. Free from the exhausting loop of retroactive logic. Free from building castles of reason on foundations of emotion. You don't have to be the perfect narrator of your life. You don't have to justify every twist and turn. Sometimes you'll act from shadow, from fear, from wounds, and that's okay. But don't pretend the mask is your face. Remove it, slowly, gently, and you may find that beneath all the justifications, all the arguments, all the dressed-up decisions, there's someone scared, someone hopeful, someone messy and unfinished, but someone real. And that, more than any perfect logic, is what deserves to be seen.